And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the Ideas Room already tonight. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, scary monsters and super creeps keep me running scared. There's a lot of scary monsters and super creeps to report on tonight, and they make their way through the entire broadcast, oddly enough, as we're going deep now in tonight's episode. This is X Series 219, the Mystery UFO File Prophecy, Roswell Exotic Technology, and Nukes. The nuke part has been going around. This has been going around. And very interestingly, I was on the Alex Jones show today, and I went and kind of opened up this Pandora's box of the missing general that we've done several reports on here. And we've been adding these layers and adding these pieces. Tonight, we're going to add a very substantial piece right in the heart of the entire case, going deep into the disappearance of General William Neal McCaslin and his understudy, as it were, Monica Reza. Very interesting. I think one case explains the other. Unfortunately, of course, the general disappeared on February 27th, and he was a very high-ranking member dealing with these very exotic materials from the UFO file and the X, technology, which always gets you into very strange territory. But it was fantastic, and the response on the Alex show was just off the charts. I got into some things about drones, but I'm going to go deeper here because I have more time in this special episode. We're going to go a couple hours with you here tonight, and I'm going to remind you that we're going to take your questions in the second half of tonight's program as we put those together, and you can ask them all in caps, and Miss Olivia, you can ask them anytime during this. She's going to put them together for us and make sure we have that for the second part of the show. And I have a feeling the Ideas Room is going to be rocking with some great questions
As
here
always.
tonight. But it was great. One of the fantastic things about Alex's show is, and I got to guest host on it, and I did a show with Alex a couple of weeks ago. And one of the kind of fascinating things about doing the Alex show is that he is so kind of tuned in on the UFO file. And a lot of people who know so much about deep state politics, for example, will shy away from the UFO thing. And Alex goes right into the heart of it. And I found that really great and really refreshing, because we need to get those types of answers once you have the president talking about disclosure. And, this is how he ended February. Unfortunately, opened March with a big war that nobody wants. But he did end February with this rather major statement, and we're going to go through the implications of that statement as it gets turned into an executive order. That's all here in this very special episode for you. And I have to say, with the amount of things, the implications of tonight's episode are so heavy duty, because you have a prophecy in the background there that we've been covering for weeks and weeks and weeks and months and years and years. And that all goes back to the Del Shao predictions and the connection of Trump with the UFO file and all these things. And now got the New York Post, the New York Times, and all these people picking up on Del Shao, the artist. And
It's amazing.
It is incredible. It is incredible. The Trump prophecy, as it were. And I have a few books that I'm going to recommend on the Del Shao thing here tonight, and a couple of great authors, some of them whom we've had on this program. That's all cooked in and baked into the pie tonight. I'm going to cover a few things that the president has been up to just to start, get us rolling in this episode. And I have to say that the weirdest part of it all is we're back to the mysterious drones. Here we go. The drones are showing up. Nobody knows where they're from, but they're over major national security sites. Like, oh, how about the homes on these different bases where Hegseth and Secretary of State Rubio live? What do you think about that for a high security location? The drones are back. Unidentified drones flew over the base where Rubio and Hegseth live. I mean, come on. Drones hovering over Rubio and Hegseth's homes leaves military officials baffled. What? I have to tell you a few things about protocols involving national security people. You can't fly drones over defense secretaries' homes without us knowing who they are. They blast out of the sky. They're escorted down, and they never get anywhere near those types of officials. So these stories being floated out there, very, very mysterious. And the fact that we're in the middle of a war with Iran raises the specter of a few things, including false flag operations, but it also raises the specter of some third actor in the background there, kind of blackmailing along, and a hidden technology factor, shall we say. So that's why so much of this becomes important tonight. And again, multiple waves of unauthorized drones recently spotted over strategic U.S. Air Force base. Now, as I said, a lot of this stuff can't be happening and is happening. This was part of the problem with the New Jersey drone swarm from 2024 into 2025, and President-elect Trump having to drive around in his limo with those little drone busters on the top and all of that ready to go. So, that changed the dynamic a little bit. At a certain point, those drones were flying over Bedminster in New Jersey, which is the, kind of New Jersey Mar-a-Lago. And so Trump was just like, hey, I'm not going, until it's secured. And I think the fact that he was president-elect at that point is also part of the intimidation that was going on. Now, in the middle of all this activity, of course, you probably heard this because it's been all over, but it's the White House registers aliens.gov domain name sparking hope of Trump news on UFOs. Very interesting story, and of course, they let it out on purpose and registered it. And there was a White House official that was contacted about this and said, what's going on? What's the news? And all the rest of these reporters were dinging. And she responded with one of those tweets with a little gray head. And the gray head was kind of like, stay tuned, you're going to hear it. So they're up to something there on the disclosure line. Part of it we know about, but obviously they've got other things planned in the middle of all this. A great segue out of the insane war activity, if they could get to disclosure and somehow get themselves out of Iran. Let's see if they can do that. It would be a master stroke. As it is, the deeper and deeper we get into that situation, the more and more of Trump's audience feels like it's not America first, and all those numbers go down. Plus, it puts us in an incredibly perilous, dangerous situation with nuclear activity all over the place and nuclear actors like Russia in the background. There's too many opportunities for mischief and mayhem to continue at this rate. It's also $1 billion a day. And now the Pentagon is asking for $200 billion from Congress. They just got $1 trillion, remember, from the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. And so we're in very unusual territory. There's no congressperson on earth should vote for that $200 billion. It's absurd. And maybe that'll get them to slow down from this incredible overdrive. And yet, right in the middle of it, we have this, aliens.gov and, the disclosure pieces coming out in Trump's statement. I did print out Trump's statement again because I want to read it and get through the details of what he was really offering there in terms of UFO disclosure. And it's quite fascinating because he's going very deep on all of this. And I would say that in relation to Trump and the things that he's been able to put out there, this is one of the strongest statements that he's ever made, saying that, we're going to get, these different agencies and the DOD and everything else to come forward with all of their files around the UFO issue, and including UAP and extraterrestrial life and all this. It's quite a Santa Claus list. There was, of course, the resignation of Joe Kent. Looking at the kind of geopolitical picture, that's not a good sign for this administration, as he was the head of counterterrorism. And there were rumors after that there was a lot of tension going on with Tulsi Gabbard as well. I had put forward a couple of weeks ago that Tulsi and Bobby should approach the White House for his own sake and say, I can't go any further with this, even if it means losing my job. And I think what's happening here, if this schism develops much further, is you're going to see something that we haven't seen really the outlines of yet, which is a different picture for 2028, that a third force beyond the Republican force and beyond the Democrat force may rise. And it might literally be Kennedy, Tulsi types that bring that forward. We got hints of it in 2024, and here we are again.
Mm-hmm.
So the whirlwind never ends, but I have a feeling there's enough of a cratering of all of this that you're going to see an entirely third force in the heart of it all. And I think, you know, someone who's just got a feeling for geopolitical events, I can feel it in the kind of zeitgeist that something else is growing right in the middle of all this. And that's going to be a third movement around the political scene. And that will directly impact the congressional and executive branch elections in 2028. I mean, we have elections this year too. But yeah, a lot of things going down on that. Everyone, you are watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X-Series 219. It's the mystery UFO file prophecy, Roswell, exotic tech, and nukes. The mystery prophecy is all about, of course, the Delshow paintings, which after many years in the shadows, and we've included them in our documentaries and things. And then boom, 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 just right through the system. An incredible wave of those Delshow paintings in the New York Post and places like that you'd never get to see them. So I guess the world is starting to catch up, huh? Quite interesting. I want to say one last thing about the drone swarms around Hegseth and Rubio. There's only two things that could be going on there, and I think they're both rather mischievous. One of them is that they know exactly what the drones are, and they're kind of raising the specter of that fear of these drones coming after us while we're in the middle of a war situation for support and for rallying the troops and circling the wagons. Or there literally is, as I mentioned, this third actor hanging out there and raising the stakes with technology and somehow being able to act in an unfettered way. That is the worst of all kind of possibilities, but we'll see how this all goes. Something that floated in there, which I haven't figured out what to make the sense of yet, is a FEMA official in the Trump administration floating the idea that he has been teleported. Have you caught this one?
I have not.
Top FEMA official claims to have teleported to a Waffle House. Teleporting is no fun, Greg Phillips picked to lead FEMA's...
Wait a second, hold on. Where was this presented?
Everywhere.
Okay.
FEMA's Office of Response and Recovery has said on a podcast, and I mean, it's ripped through everything from the Washington Post to Rolling Stone.
Okay.
Look at this guy. All right. He's been teleporting to Waffle Houses. He's a FEMA official. He's a big shot in FEMA. And here he is saying this. Now, what is this to say? I'm going to read a couple of things here of what he has to say. January 20, recent podcast. Okay. He has done a series of podcast appearances. Phillips claimed that his car was lifted up while he was driving and transported 40 miles away into a ditch near a church. Now, in another instance in the same episode, Phillips said he was teleported 50 miles away to a Waffle House in Rome, Georgia. Fine, Rome, Georgia. CNN detailed in a deep dive into Phillips' past public statements. I was with my boys one time and I was telling them I was going to go to the Waffle House and get Waffle House. Okay, I guess you mean get waffles. And I ended up at a Waffle House. Oh boy. I was in Georgia and I ended up at a Waffle House like 50 miles away from where I was, Phillips said on the podcast Onward, co-hosted by right-wing activist Catherine Engelbrecht. Phillips added, and they said, "Where are you?" And I said, "A Waffle House." And "A Waffle House where?" And I said, "A Waffle House in Rome, Georgia." And they said, "That's not possible. You just left here a moment ago." But it was possible. It was real. Wait, it's not over yet. Phillips did warn about the dangers of teleportation. "Teleporting is no fun," he said. "You know it's happening, but you can't do anything about it." So you just go and you just go for the ride, and wow, what an incredible adventure it all was.
Wait. Okay. He's at
He's a FEMA official.
so
Yeah. He's
there's so many holes in this story already.
yeah.
Did he not intend to teleport? He was suddenly, unexpectedly teleport. Who teleported him?
That's a damn good question. Teleporting
How
is
did
no
they know
fun.
he wanted to go to a Waffle House?
Well, it's rather interesting on a number of levels. Obviously, somebody with the technology was having a little fun, or he was having a little bit of a mental lapse. We're going to leave it to your imagination, but whoa.
But
This
you
guy
said
is really doing it.
real media outlets reported on this.
No question.
And nobody actually asked these questions?
Well,
These
they
follow-up-
were concerned with making him look foolish, which I think they did, but also, they didn't take it seriously for a moment. Of course not.
Is he still employed at FEMA?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So there's no cover story. Like he had a mental breakdown, he's having marital problems, anything like that.
No, I think the response from FEMA was, oh, he was on a podcast. He just said some stuff. We have more important work to do. Yeah.
Okay.
It's something else.
That's as crazy as saying that he teleported, right? Is that the response to it?
Yeah.
He's like totally blasé.
Yeah. Flatlined completely. I will say, there have been rumors of that kind of technology all along. And if you work in a place like FEMA, you may have heard those rumors. But whether or not this actually happened to him, I always go back to this rather interesting story that was told to me by the daughter of Thomas Townsend Brown. And, she had told me a number of kind of fascinating things about her life with her father. And T.T. Brown at one point said to her, we're driving into the desert. I'm going to show you something special and pack a bag. And she did, and they drove out there, and they went to a place that looked something like a building inside. It had a glass elevator. When she got into the elevator, it went up, and she felt strange. And he said, okay, I'm going to leave you off, basically. And when she got out of the elevator at the floor that it stopped off on, it led out at a beach. Now, the beach was far away from where the desert was. So this was some kind of teleportation chamber. Now, was she dreaming? Was she in some kind of a rapture state, or was this real technology? Certainly there are hints of this kind of technology. And whenever they've circulated around, we've gotten weird stories like jump rooms, where you walk into one room and you jump to Mars and all that kind of thing. And certainly if we can imagine it, then, there's some possibility of it happening. And yet there's all kinds of things that could be going on there. But in the case of Thomas Townsend Brown, he was around this type of technology that was really completely unexplainable. So the minute I saw the Waffle House teleporter, I said to myself, this reminds me of that story. So yeah, deep in the heart of Texas on that one. I want to go on the record as saying that I believe the disappearance of Monica Reza and William McCaslin is directly related to the advanced technology that came out of the Roswell project, particularly what's known as memory metal. I'm going to provide some information, links, and documents here tonight. And I think if you look at it seriously, you may arrive at the same exact conclusion that this is the reason. The sensitivity around the thing that they were working on is exactly the reason why we're in these kind of mysterious circumstances. And with McCaslin gone since the 27th, the odds on a daily basis of getting him back, get lower and lower under any different scenarios, unfortunately. And so when I address these issues, it's with a nod to the fact that the people involved in the whole thing, from Reza's family to McCaslin's family, it's a great struggle. And I don't take it lightly when I go to lay out the facts about the reasons for the disappearance. But this may offer some type of lead in this sense, because there's something very, very unusual about the fact that Monica Reza was working on a very unusual type of metal alloy, and it was being adopted by the space program, and that he was overseeing her in that project, but he was also overseeing the Roswell UFO redevelopment at Wright-Patterson, which is really one of the most secret of all. And we talk a lot about redevelopment at Area 51, but Wright-Patterson has been locked down since day one, and the famous Hangar 18 has always been there as a kind of a thorn in the side in the background. Everyone's always known whatever goes on at Area 51 stays there, but Hangar 18 has its own kind of strange mythology and street legends associated with it. One of the famous stories in relation to this, of course, is Senator Barry Goldwater, who, after all, he also had a very high rank in the military, and his close friend was Curtis LeMay. And he kept hurling about all these stories that they were keeping these UFO objects there at quote unquote the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson. Now, if you know anything about this program, you know that I've presented all of this information around the UFO file and Blue. And Blue is the name of the actual program for crash retrieval and development and things of this nature. And the whole redesign of the UFO technology. Blue is at the very heart of it, and it explodes in that period from 1960 to 1963, and the cutoff there with the president's assassination. I forced this issue in 2023. I put out a number of stories about it, and finally just made a documentary about Blue. And a number of counterintelligence people got in touch with me trying to figure out what was going on and where I was getting this from. And so they knew, just like I knew, and they were trying to figure out how the name get out, basically. So at
They
a certain,
wanted to know who was leaking the information to you.
yeah, there was no leaks involved either.
Yeah.
But what it was really, if you go deep enough into the research, you can find the real thrust of the whole thing. You just have to know where to look, which isn't always easy. And you might also say there's a certain amount of intuition involved with it, but what was very strange was that the Blue program had to be acknowledged by the government. And so we put it out in the spring of 2023, then the documentary in the fall of 2023. And then by the spring of 2024, the government came forward and said, yeah, we did. We had a program called Blue, and it was all about crash retrievals. That's where Kona Blue and all these documents is all about. And yes, it was, crash retrievals of UFO materials, but we never found anything. We never were able to do, any crash retrievals because we didn't find any crashes. So therefore it doesn't mean anything. Well, that was a very, very strange toss off in the middle of all that. But I put together a number of programs around Blue, and I've presented them in a series of shows. I can put forward here that is the name of the program in the background that the government uses for moving UFO materials through different agencies. And, the X-steganography is something that we've dealt with a lot on this show. The steganography around Blue, completely off the charts. And you're going to find even tonight when we mention something very classic about the Roswell case, that another Blue, a couple of other Blues come up as well. McCaslin and his relationship to all this, I'm going to just restate a few fundamental things. One, there's an email I'll read. That's him and his kind of disappearance outfit there. So he was brought up by Tom DeLonge, who was pitching John Podesta on how all three of them could work together. And he was saying that he put together my team, and supposedly the general was working with him on all these things in some kind of light form of disclosure that was aimed at the media and the younger population. And so they were going to do this whole thing where they're going to try to get kids, into it, or teenagers into the whole thing, and build it in from there, hoping that they wouldn't ask too many questions about it. And the scenario went something like this. When you think about DeLonge, it was coming out, and DeLonge was basically saying, hey, we owe a big debt of gratitude to these warriors inside the CIA. They've been fighting demons out in space. And this was where he was coming from. Now, the CIA used him for a while, but they decided, he's our Bobo. As long as he's doing well, we'll push it. But at a certain point, he stopped doing well, so they just dropped him like a hot potato. That's how the Central Intelligence Agency works. And they will use marginal figures. That's something that you have to be aware of when you deal with them. And they will push them at different times and see if they can kind of, move the pieces around on the board and shape the game differently. But at a certain point, they'll also withdraw their support. And when that happens, it's like they were never there in the first place. But in any case, WikiLeaks went through this huge series of drops in 2016. And right in the heart of it, it was aimed now at the Clinton campaign, Hillary Clinton's campaign against Donald Trump, because she had done a number of, illegal activities to try to get herself nominated on the Democrat side, which she did. But WikiLeaks saw through it and started to leak her emails. In the middle of those emails was Podesta was her campaign manager, and therefore all the emails that Podesta was getting were coming out. And this one came out on January 25th, 2016, so right into that first year of the campaign. And the title of the email is General McCaslin. I kid you not. Now, it's from DeLong to Podesta, and I'm going to read it here in full. It's very short. And this is DeLong talking about McCaslin now. He said, he's mentioned he's a skeptic. He's not. I've been working with him for 4 months. I just got done giving him a 4-hour presentation on the entire project a few weeks ago. Soft disclosure, TTSA project. Trust me, the advice has already been happening on how to do all this. He just has to say that out loud, but he's very, very aware, and he was in charge of all that stuff. When Roswell crashed, they shipped it to the laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. General McCaslin was in charge of that exact laboratory up to a couple of years ago. Now, this is what DeLong is telling Podesta. And so we have 10 years before his disappearance, DeLong's going on record in these secret emails that no one thought are going to be leaked, and they're coming directly through. And that's Best Tom DeLong, founder to the Stars Academy. Now, those have all been verified through WikiLeaks and everything else, so there's no reason to doubt the veracity of the information or the details in there. And yet there we are with the name of the email itself, General McCaslin. Think about that. So right in the heart of things. So DeLong is dealing with the general, and he's explaining the general is in charge of all of the Roswell material. Now, a little bit of the background of McCaslin himself. General McCaslin, the commander of Air Force Base Research Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is where a great deal of that rebooting of the entire program goes, from the stage of black technology all the way up and beyond we go. So we're looking at all this, and what happens is the general is overseeing a staff dealing with redevelopment of these products that have been drawn out now over the course of some 70 years of redevelopment in the UFO programs, the black UFO programs. And what has to be looked at, I think, in relation to all this is that, we're really talking about a serious overseer of all this. The position that McCaslin held has to be looked at in this rather a dramatic fashion. Now, something I will say, which is that McCaslin himself is somebody who, in his own background, is very close to all of the astronaut programs. He was also majorly involved with Kirtland Air Force Base, where all this UFO activity in New Mexico happened, and so on down the line for years, literally for decades and decades. So he had a Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautic Engineering, and at Colorado Springs, Master of Sciences degree in Aeronautical Engineering from MIT. As a Doctor of Philosophy, and he also was involved with advanced programs and went to the Kennedy School right over here at Harvard University as well. This guy's assignments, I could be here all night talking about them, because he's been gifted with all of these incredibly high impact assignments, and off he goes. Now, he basically has been there with the Legion of Merit, Oak Leaf Cluster, Defense Superior Service Medal, Meritorious Service Medal, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, Distinguished Service Medal. I mean, this guy, untouchable. So this idea that he could just disappear under suspicious circumstances and nobody would ever hear about it or know about it is beyond absurd. When you have officials like that, people that are in a position, they are basically watched. And you can't, because of the high impact knowledge that they have, they are already an asset. And I may have explained this before, but that's one of the things that Stanton Friedman, who had worked in some black projects for the government because he was a nuclear physicist, he had gone forward and he had said some things along the line of he had a car crash when he was transporting materials that were related to project materials back and forth between these two sites. And when he had the car crash and he went off the road, he struck himself on the wheel or whatever, somebody came along immediately and they retrieved the materials that he had. And then they left him there. Maybe they called an ambulance for him and took off. That's how it works. The material are what's important, and the knowledge factor and the way that somebody gets watched, because they don't want somebody with the information like a McCaslin type person to go hiking in the woods, get grabbed by a foreign power or a group inside the United States, whatever it happens to be, a kind of corporate syndicate group, and then learn all this stuff by being able to hold the general and get all this information from him. There are dramatic protocols in place for this. So again, when the media comes out with these stories that, oh, he wandered off, that doesn't make any sense. When the media comes up with stories that, hey, we have these drones over Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, that doesn't make any sense. When the media came forward during the whole Chinese balloon escapade during the Biden administration, and NORAD figures came out and said, we just didn't see that balloon coming in. I don't know what happened. Look, NORAD was built to withstand a Russian nuclear attack. Our entire defense system in the sky is built to ward off and meet and, deflect a nuclear attack. You're not going to have a balloon going by there without NORAD knowing about it. So most absurd indeed. We even have, I went back and checked on this. We have wartime rules of engagement from World War II because the Japanese at the time had sailed a poisonous balloon and actually killed some citizens in Oregon. So, on the books, there's already things about balloons and rules about balloons and how things need to be escorted out or blown out, whatever it happens to be. They aren't allowed to just go across the country and hang out. So all of that was ridiculous. And then NORAD was like, yeah, we fixed our sensors. We tightened them up. And so we won't see any more balloons, In fact, there were more balloons. But so when you get that type of blasé cover story, there's something where the media needs to put this out to kind of put you to sleep about it. In the background, what could be happening, and I know from some reports that in the McCaslin case, they haven't been seeing any volunteers. They haven't been seeing any law enforcement scoping those mountains when they're saying, oh, yeah, we're hard at work trying to find this guy. Well, some of the volunteers were looking around and saying, nobody has shown up and there's no law enforcement people here. I don't know what's going on. Those are the reports coming out. So there's some other group that's aware of what happened to him, or they're searching in a way that, doesn't relate to the normal circumstances. Now, we started the year off with a couple of mysterious deaths, and we went through the link of these types of things to, for example, the death of the Strategic Defense Initiative, a Star Wars scientist back in the 1980s. There are these programs to remove these people when they get into these very high-ranking positions if they're moving on certain types of technology. And the groups that could be doing it could actually be inside the government protecting this type of thing. For example, what I refer to as the X-Protect group, if you get too close to one of their programs and you are in a program still working for the government, but it steps on the toes of what they're doing, they may have their own recourse involved, and it might have nothing to do with the government being involved with doing that. Because the X-Protect group, again, exists in some kind of shadowy corridor between the aerospace groups and the intelligence agencies. So you're in that corridor, and what is it? Where does it actually fall? So the aerospace companies, the defense contractors, and this thing. The X-Protect group, throughout history, responsible for a lot of trouble in relation to UFO investigators. But when you get around patterns like what we're seeing with these major ranking scientists like Nuno Loureiro over here at MIT, and the strange case of this shooter who shot some people up at Brown and then went to his house in Brookline and shot him up before knocking himself off in a storage space over the border, just over the border into New Hampshire, shows just how bizarre the nature of the whole situation is. So you have to watch those patterns and understand what might be going on there. Somebody else in the middle of that pattern who we've covered, and I've tried to find better explanations for what's going on with these people and trying to find why the stories don't add up in each of these cases. And the other one is the Caltech astrophysicist who was killed on his remote ranch on his porch. And that is Carl Grillmer. One of the interesting things about that case is the person who was set up, who was, charged in the crime, rather. That person had a list of petty crimes in their background, but never anything serious like this. And they were just recently let go of a couple of weeks ago. And there hasn't been anything new coming forward on that. But this guy, supposedly, his explanation was he was around there, looking to do some carjacking. And it's such a remote location that's just bizarre, that they think that that's what he was up to. And so the only thing they can say is the mystery is deepening. Well, the mystery is deepening with Loureiro. The mystery is deepening with Grillmer. The mystery is deepening with McCaslin and his assistant, Monica Reza. They're all either murdered or missing. And in the case of Reza, I think it's unusual because, she's going hiking there back last June 22nd in Los Angeles. And she's, in the forest, and she's going up this trail, and the other person's about 20 feet ahead of her and waving back, and she's waving back and smiling, and her friend is moving along, looks back, and she's gone. So they're very sophisticated activities. If they aren't traceable to the authorities, they're highly sophisticated. And she now, this has been ruled that this missing person is no longer with us because she has not been found. So they've just made that assumption at this point. But what the real story is, again, is shrouded in this very unusual mystery. And McCaslin's and his work and her work with the metals goes directly into the next segment that we're going to get into.
Is this why you brought up Waffle House to begin with? I mean, is there a connection?
No, not at all.
You could connect them.
The teleporting? Absolutely.
All
Yeah.
of a sudden.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's sort of a missing 411 situation. So it's weird. You've been using this name, and I thought it reminds me of something. And I realized it may not mean anything, but there's Monica Reyes was the character that they brought in on the X-Files. Do you remember that? It's just a very close
Oh, it's not
name.
interesting.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Interesting. Well, when I look at this case, the things that I'm seeing in terms of patterns is I see the UFO file front and center with McCaslin, and I don't think that we would know that without the WikiLeaks piece. And again, it's these things where you get a break because ordinarily the system is tight as a drum and you wouldn't get this kind of information. You might not even know McCaslin was associated with the UFO file if it wasn't for those emails, you see. And they were gotten in this very unusual method and given to WikiLeaks in 2016 at the height of the election. So therefore, we're not supposed to have that information. Now the picture starts to make sense, which is, oh, he's missing and he was associated with these programs. And a deep, deep player. I want to stress that as well. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X-Series 219, the mystery UFO file prophecy, Roswell, exotic tech, and nukes. Going deep, deep here tonight into the general is missing. We're going to show you some of the things they were working on at that Wright-Patterson base from our own investigation and how it relates directly back to that crash on the very unusual ranch, the Foster Ranch, out there in New Mexico, some almost 70 odd years ago. And I have to say this in relation to Roswell also, or 80, I guess it's closer to 80 years, because 2027 it'll be 80 years. One of the things I want to say about Roswell is a number of things have been put out there to try to debunk it over the years and all the rest of it. One of the greatest kind of examples of why it's an authentic case is the fact that Roswell, the case, wasn't even on the record at all for 30 years. It was the one article based on the fact that right as it happened, they put out the press release. It was like, there's a flying saucer that crashed in Roswell. That hits all these newspapers. And then they button up the story hard. And I mean really hardcore. And once the story is buttoned up, the chances of getting it, back are almost impossible. And what happens literally in the heart of all that is that Jesse Marcel, 30 years later, talks to Stanton Friedman in Louisiana, where he's retired, and gives him all these details about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't know anything about that. So you see how this works. There's these little breaks in the whole situation. And I want to say this too when I talk about X-Protect, which is anyone who's involved in a major case like that, for example, Kenneth Arnold, Jesse Marcel, if you look in the literature, you will find immediately after the case, things happen to make them disappear. Now, if the attempt fails, then somehow they're able to go on. In the case of Jesse Marcel, he was set after the Roswell incident to go on this trip over to France, but they were going to go through the hot zone of the Bahamas, and the plane disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle. He was pulled and delayed off of that plane by Charles Lindbergh, who was very involved with the activities around Roswell. And he said, "Oh no, I need him. You can't take him for this flight." And Marcel, in his own recollection years later, said, that whole plane disappeared right into the Bermuda Triangle. How unusual is that? Bringing those two things together, bringing these worlds together, as it were. Now, I will say also that one thing that I've put on the record, and allow me to repeat it here, which is that Loureiro, he was the professor and director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center. He was the one who was killed by the Brown shooter. And supposedly in that case, Valente, who was the shooter, knew him. And as I said, first went to Brown and shot up these students, and then drove himself up to Brookline and shot Loureiro in his little foyer, and then disappeared, escaped without a trace until they found him in that storage space. Now, Loureiro was working on such and a majorly impactful program, such a black program. But it was enough, parts of it were open enough that you could see that the open source aspect of it could have stepped on the black ops side of it. And that's what happened there. But I discovered this because it was part of the funeral, remarks and people giving tributes to Nuno. And they were saying, he was so interested and he was working on this program about neutron star mergers. So I've tried to get this across over and over again, that the program that took him out was about neutron star mergers, which is massive. If you know anything, even vague facts about the power of what could be in the middle of all that, which is these black holes get created when these two stars meet, and the fragments, the little bits that we can identify about that, and you can recreate in a lab the impact of the whole thing. Think about that. It's like CERN on steroids plus some. So when you think about that, when you think about Grillmare being somebody who found water on other planets, and then you think of the incredible scientific leaps and achievements that they had in that lab, re-engineering the Roswell material, and how McCaslin at a certain point, as we found on the record, was in charge of that. This advanced technology feature starts to make a whole lot more sense. And the strange disappearance or the strange deaths involved start to unfortunately make sense as well. The thing is to expose these types of things and keep them in such a way that the people involved in the projects are protected, or the projects become known to the public, so there's oversight. This is what's missing, I think, in all of these cases, and it's a very dangerous situation for those that are involved. I still harken back to when they were doing all of these strange assassinations of the holistic doctors. This is a wave that happened, you may remember, about 2017, 2018. But I knew some people who worked with holistic doctors, and one of them told me literally that the doctor had taken off and was in hiding. And that whole wave was apparently related to GC-MAF, but it happened just before COVID. So my guess has always been they wanted to delete those people who were so important to, and when the COVID thing came up, could be the ones who really identified it. So you couldn't really pull off the op, as it were. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, X Series 219. Now we're going to get into memory metal, but first, Miss Olivia, Europe.
Sandy Corcoran says a remote viewers group says that McCaslin was taken by, quote, Snake Eyes, a reptilian group. Have you heard anything about that?
No. And now, what I'd be very interested to know what that group would be all about, for example. So are we talking about an extraterrestrial group? Is that the idea?
Yes, I think so.
Okay,
The
very,
question
very
is,
interesting.
why would they take him? What's the agenda? I mean, they can eat anybody. So there's nothing special about a scientist,
Yeah.
right? So what are the
Snake Eyes. Well, we might have to hear more about that.
Definitely.
Very, very interesting. I'm going to go after the mystery metal thing in this rather interesting route that again features Tom DeLonge and his tatty CIA group, the To the Stars Academy, TTSA, which I spent many hours exposing on this program, say circa 2019, 2020. And, we put forward things like, hey, Lou Elizondo is a, counterintelligence CIA agent. And all these people were like, oh, no, he's the beacon of disclosure. He lost his job for standing up for truth and all these different things. And now it took 5 years, 6 years for people to catch up on that. One of these other researchers were like, oh, hey, look, he worked for the DIA. He worked for the CIA. Problem is with a lot of this stuff is you can't wait. And so it's not good enough for it to take 5 years for the whole thing to catch up. And this is part of the problem. So you need a kind of active patience, I guess, with all of it. On one hand, there's this incredible demand for every fact on the book, and I need disclosure now. And you see these types of people who are like, their lives are going to end if disclosure doesn't happen in the next 10 minutes. It's a process. The only way you'd get anything out of it is if it were a process, but you can't ever expect anything on the government side to really give you the answers on that. The answers would come based on citizen researchers and things of this nature, and then it would move its way to government things. They'd be the last ones to give it to you first, and the things that they would give you would all be motivated. I mean, just look at everything that's going on now in relation to the budget and wars and everything else. You think you're getting any truth from these people about what's going on? Not at all. You still have people living in a fantasy like, hey, this war is great, and we're getting the bad guys and all that. You're spending $1 billion a day and they want 200 billion more while they incredibly destabilize the entire world. That's not a good trade. So you have to be very savvy with all of this. And so what I mean to say is when things come up, and I say you can't wait 5 years to undo the op in that sense, you may have to, but I would say in these particular situations, I'd like to bring a kind of focal point to a number of these situations so that we don't go through this process of waiting to find out the real answers that take place much, much later. Now, it's funny, the government finally let out some things last year relating to the Kennedy assassination. They still haven't let out the fact that the Central Intelligence Agency assassinated him. But think about that, the arc of some 62 years of information locked up, the ridiculous stories that the public was told, a number of different things that went out, disinformation programs, witnesses bumped off, obfuscation from the very top, from the Supreme Court to Central Intelligence Agency to the mainstream media. And the entire culture was built around this weird lie, all because the deep state activities inside of the government, on the inside, the covert aspect of the government, took out the overt public side of the government, which was, in that case, was President Kennedy and all of his policies. The things that I've focused on, and I think was the last straw in relation to Kennedy, is the UFO file. We've put a number of things out to prove this. But I think that what's important about this, it's not just a retread of history, is that the entire lack of resolution around the Kennedy assassination holds out there in our own history of America and the world. And it's a distortion. It's a distortion that maintains itself year in and year out. And it was such a hardcore distortion and such a crucial element for the deep state to hold on to. It's kind of the major deep state secret in all of this, that whenever there were committees that went to look into it years after, a decade later, the first committees covered it up and killed the witnesses. The next committees killed the next group, including organized crime figures and others, just before they were about to testify. And, by the time you got to the 1990s, there were people who were still involved from that era. It was 30 years later. And the Assassination Record Review Board would call those people, and they would die mysterious. So, how deep is your love here? The intelligence groups and the information that they need to suppress the program goes on and on and on and on. So let's go into the reason why somebody like Monica Reza may have disappeared, and particularly with her work around metals, which we already know she was working as a specialist. She's an aerospace engineer, but she's working as a specialist, developing this very, very interesting type of metal, which I believe was a redevelopment of the original Roswell crash. And it's going to be Jesse Marcel himself from beyond, his resting place, that's going to give us that information through his own testimony, which I have here. All right, first item up for bids. The Army wants to verify To the Stars Academy's fantastic UFO mystery material. Do you remember there was a certain segment of time during the whole UFO waves when they were, saying, oh, this thing is going to come out. The New York Times article came out, and they were like, yeah, there's all these meta materials. Do you remember those? Mm-hmm. Meta material, yes. And this was supposed to be ad nauseum, and it was entirely the edge around this thing, which is metamaterials somehow were going to feature this UAP release, and it was going to be the merging of these different worlds. Now, Adam is the name of the research project that the TTSA was doing. Remember, TTSA is all CIA. DeLong is just the front man. In the background, when I did all these programs on TTSA, the chief operating officer, Jim Semivan, 25-year veteran of the directorate, the top level. Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, DOD billionaire. We've had so many different skirmishes with them. So this whole group was just it's a creature of the CIA. And what was going on here was they made this deal. And I'm going to read some of the details of it here. Just yesterday, the U.S. Army confirmed that it had entered into a curious cooperative deal with former Blink-182 frontman Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy, the CIA front, more commonly known as TTSA, to investigate certain novel materials. The War Zone, which is the blog that's covering this, has now obtained a minimally redacted copy of the agreement that clearly says that the Army wants to attempt to verify TTSA's claims. Now, the metamaterial in question was something from Linda Moulton Howe that she had got through Art Bell. When he died, he left it to her, and it was from someone who had worked on the Roswell crash and kept a piece, and they had given it to Bell. And so DeLonge's group came to her and said, we've heard you had this thing, do you mind if we buy it from you so we can do all these tests? It'll move everything forward and all the rest. And she was like, all right. And they said, $35,000, and they made the deal. And, Linda's been on record about that. She's like, well, I had it, and maybe they were going to do something good with it. So that's what happened with it. And now what's interesting is the Army claimed to want to attempt to verify all this stuff. This whole story about TTSA and the Army vanished eventually. There was never anything about it, never any good follow-up. And TTSA first announced the Cooperative Research Development Agreement, CRADA, October 17th, 2019. The Army's Ground Vehicle Systems Center, part of the service's Combat Capabilities Development Command, now sits under the recently established Futures Command, confirmed that the existence of the agreement and offered some additional details. So it was on the record. They made it public. Then there was a press release that was put out by TTSA saying they had done all this. All right, fine. Keep that in mind. 2019, they made this deal about the mystery metal. Metamaterials, right? Let's go back further in time. We're going back in time. Is there music for going back in time? Roswell Daily Record. Okay, this is from 2009. Metal fragments found at 1947 crash. Now, that entire article is about these two researchers who claimed that after all their efforts kicking around Corona, that they had found what they thought were definitely fragments from this. And one of the unusual things about it is I noticed if you go back into that period of 2009, you're going to find about 3 or 4 stories about this. So just keep that in the back of your head as we go forward. 2019, the metamaterials are on sale. Arts parts, the whole thing. The Army wants a piece of it. Lou Elizondo is going to get, his name bronzed on the UFO door, the UAP door, excuse me. All right, 2009 again. An article in the Herald Tribune by Billy Cox. This is from May of 2009. With a boost from Sarasota resident Tony Bragalia. Now, this guy is very interesting. He wrote, actually, some very unusual books about what the Air Force had been shared, some information about Pleiadian aliens and things of this nature. But I'll leave all that aside. The enduring Roswell UFO controversy is about to swing into the spotlight onto one of the most successful research and development entities in America, Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio. Remember, Wright-Patterson's in Ohio. Now, Battelle, it turns out, is the rumored place where the materials were sent after they landed at Wright-Patterson and then were redeveloped at Battelle. At issue are some missing reports from Battelle's study of a nickel-titanium alloy called nitinol, renowned for its resilience as a memory metal. Properties in the late 1940s. Battelle participates in or manages 6 national laboratories in the U.S. Department of Energy, including Oak Ridge, Lawrence Livermore, and Brookhaven. You don't get any bigger than that. Now, the problem is neither Battelle nor the United States Air Force can produce copies of what the scientific literature refers to as the Second Progress Report on Contact AF33. And then they have other numbers, 0383736. Bragalia suspects that's because the data is still highly classified due to its source, a flying disc that crashed outside of Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. Now, this controversy takes place in 2009, 10 years before the Army deal. Personal testimony is one thing, says Bragalia, whose research skills have been polished by his business as an executive search consultant. But when you start talking about those documents in the history of science, unlike testimonials, their provenance is not questioned. Bragalia's work is showcased in the just released update of the book Witness to Roswell. There's information in that book, and Don Schmidt wrote the book, and he's been deep in the heart of Texas on the Roswell thing for years. Now, As chief of the Research and Engineering Division of AAF headquarters, I'm trying to get the first name of this person, Craigie. Well, I'll keep rolling with this. Oh, General Lawrence Craigie. Okay, that's what it is. So, an Army Air Force veteran from Ellington named Ben Games told a tale that no one had ever heard before. In July of 1947, he flew General Lawrence Craigie to Roswell during a furor over the alleged UFO recovery. And there was an incredible furor inside the national security state at that point. As chief of the research and engineering divisions at AAF headquarters, Craigie had offices at the Pentagon and at present-day Wright-Patterson. Remember, again, lock it in your mind, McCaslin, Wright-Patterson, his assistant, Wright-Patterson, both missing. In October 47, he became director of research and development for the U.S. Air Force. At the end of the year, he authorized the first ever USAF study of flying saucers. From 48 to 50, he served as the commandant of the United States Air Force Institute of Technology at Wright-Patterson. In 1991, retired Brigadier General Arthur Exon confirmed for author and investigators Kevin Schmidt and Kevin Randall that the Roswell debris was transferred to Wright-Patterson. It was called Wright Field at the time, 1947. Civilians and military personnel handled the stuff, compared some components to aluminum foil, except that it would conform to original shape after being crumpled. Now, we've done Roswell episodes. The Roswell Reignited series that we did last summer gives you a really deep overview on the memory metal and the unusual aspects of the hieroglyphs on the pillars and the strange things that were reported there by Marcel. Exxon, a lieutenant colonel at the base at the time, said lab chiefs in charge of testing the material knew they had something new in their hands. The metal in the material was unknown to anyone I talked to. However, Exxon, who was promoted to Wright-Patterson base commander in 1964, never had access to the debris. But who did? And if, as skeptics contend, the thing that went down in Roswell was simply an exotic balloon project, why did Craigie make a hurried flight to New Mexico from Washington? So this whole thing strings along, and then there's a mystery at the end of the day, which is what happened to the report about the metal, and Patel never produced it, and it's just missing. So the memory metal files are missing. That's the thrust of it, and I could go further and read you that, but I think you get the idea at this point. The only thing I will say is at the end, there's an interesting quote that says, "The NASA connection is huge," says Bergelia. "When you begin taking stuff into space and testing it under microgravity conditions, it allows you to develop material of exceptional purity." Battelle, listed as a charitable trust exempt from taxation, is most famously known in UFO circles for producing a 1954 Air Force Project Blue Book study called Special Report Number 14, concluding that 20% of UFOs in the military database were unknowns. Battelle directly contradicted the then U.S. Air Force Secretary Donald Quarles' assertion that only 3% of the sightings were unknown. Battelle is very artful at concealing its connections, said Bergelia. So you have some strange reports in this wave, and they all relate again to this metal and what happened to it. And then other people saying, well, I found part of it. Then you have the Army through the CIA group, TTSA, trying to purchase it through this whole Art Bell thing, thinking, let's get a piece of it here, a piece of it here, and what's going on with it. Now, the Army always had it in the first place. They wanted to know who else had it. This was the danger and the mystery that was involved. And they went through, if you go through the literature, you're going to find all of these Roswell witnesses quizzed, pushed, intimidated, and sometimes under very, very stressful conditions. And really, the whole object of the deal was, where is that memory metal? Did you keep some of it? Do you know someone who has part of this? And remember, they had the bulk of it for sure, but they wanted to have everything. And if they didn't have everything, then they felt this incredible memory metal is out there. Someone else could do what we're doing with it. Obviously, they had found a very great prize in the middle of it all. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 219, the Mystery UFO File Prophecy, Roswell, Exotic Tech, and Nukes. going deep, deep tonight into the mystery metal from Roswell, Jesse Marcel, and the disappearance of General McCausland. We're going to be taking your questions shortly here, but before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
DA says, here we are right back at the Jesse Marcel unknown metal and with missing scientists this time.
Yes.
Imanara says, Reza had just joined NASA JPL and was working as the director of their materials processing group at the time she went missing. Gavin Hinn says, perhaps the exotic metals being worked on were the Roswell crash site metal and that she had reverse engineered the metal. McCausland knew how, and she told her captives that McCausland was required. So maybe there was a project, I guess, that they're working on together somewhere.
Oh, yeah. That's a lot of ifs that you're creating a thread and an idea there. But I will say this, what rings true in the middle of all that is she was very capable, and it's already known on the record that she was working and had developed a very sophisticated, she was working on a very secret project, and then it became this advanced metal project. So everyone knew there's an advanced metal and it was being rolled into our space program. And that when she was working on that, she was being overseen by who? McCausland. Now, McCausland is also running the redevelopment of the UFO file. So putting them together under that makes absolute sense. It's a very kind of credible claim, you could say, in the heart of it all. Question is, you have this kind of phony front group, the TTSA, coming forward, run by the Central Intelligence Agency. And look at the whole piece of how they rolled things out. I had a number of different encounters around DeLong and TTSA and Elizondo and Mellon and all that. But if you look at it, what's going on there is there's an attempt to consolidate and put out this UFO threat version through the Central Intelligence Agency, the DIA figures, and all these counterintelligence agents. And that whole piece of the whistleblowers coming out before Congress, you know, that's how we got the whole thing about Burchett and Luna doing these UFO conferences, 2023, UFO congresses, rather. They were like conferences, and they treated them like podcasts, right? There's a problem with that whole thing. That was a wave, and they got a lot of information out of it. Of course, famously, when I talked to David Grush, and he came to me saying, you're right about the X-Protect people. I can give you more information. He spent all of this time with me going over a number of things. And then when I talked, I said, the things that you're telling me, you have to come on the show and say this, because I haven't heard you say this in your interviews with Russ Coldhart or whoever. And he said, oh no, I could never do that. You know what Chris Mellon would do? That was the tell, and that's how we got into a number of things around me revealing this and Mellon freaking out online, and John Warner, his cousin, and Warner, who is the son of Senator Warner, the late senator, who was MJ-12 senator, really informed and understanding and saying, Chris, my cousin Chris, is trying to launch the UFO threat initiative through these people, and he's connected to that whole deep state bit. So this is the clash. These are the factors we've been able to bring forward on it. That all comes through TTSA. All those people are associated with TTSA. Elizondo, of course, the false whistleblower who supposedly was disgruntled and wanted to get the truth out, but that government wouldn't let him, that whole thing. While he was working for the government the whole time, and he was given this incredibly soft treatment through the media. If you've watched this program, you know those details pretty well. And all the people who promoted him, trying to get him into this position of being a kind of UFO czar. Now, that was somebody who had a 25-year career, DIA, CIA, and who was being put forward by James Clapper, who was the disgraced, director of intelligence. And he, this is quite fascinating, he'd been convicted by Congress of lying to Congress. So you have a convicted perjurer there who put forward facts that were false before Congress. That's the guy who they featured in the Age of Disclosure CIA movie that came out with the documentary. And we did a big thing on that. If you haven't watched that, it's back there in November or something. But I did a big special, which included Warner and some other guys. Now, what I want us to get from all this is that sketchy outfit, the TTSA, somehow they mixed themselves up with this Roswell medal thing. And I believe what was going on was a kind of competition, you know, a kind of, what are those shows where they compete for things?
What do you mean, like
You know,
reality shows?
well, yeah, or it's not like Survivor, but like, you know, America's Best or
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
I don't watch enough TV. But anyway, the idea is that they had some kind of competition that was, look, we know there's some of this material that's out there. We need a program for you to go out and vacuum it up, suck it up somewhere. And they sent a few people out to do this. This is my belief of what took place there. And I think the arts parts piece of metal from the craft was part of that vacuuming up job. They wanted to make sure that not 1 ounce of this stuff, of this special alloy, whatever it happened to be, had any possibility of reaching anything beyond their control. Now, I want to mention something in, I always say Ayn Rand, her famous book.
Right.
Ayn Rand wrote these incredible books, but they were also from such an informed intellectual piece. And when she did Atlas Shrugged, she had a very interesting thing in there. And because it was Project X, I paid attention to it and kept it in my files because of my X steganography fascination. But just listen to this. Project X is an invention of the scientists at the State Science Institute in the book, requiring tons of Reardon metal. Basically, it's a death ray and is capable of destroying anything with a sonic pulse. The scientists claim that the project will be used to preserve peace and squash rebellion. It is destroyed towards the end of the book and emits a pulse of sound that destroys everything in the surrounding area, including Cuffy Meigs and Dr. Stadler, and so on. The invention is publicly introduced as the Thomson harmonizer. Reardon metal. Reardon metal is a fictitious metal alloy invented by Hank Reardon. It is lighter than traditional steel, but stronger, and is to steel what steel is to iron. It is described as a greenish blue, and one of its ingredients are iron. I thought it was so weird, and that she in the background in her circles where she must have been hearing something about this very special metal and the fact that the deep state had control of it and the types of things that they could do with it. Whenever I get around X steganography, that's where my head goes on all this. Okay. Now, you might remember that part of the cracking the Roswell case was, you know, when Marcel shows up and takes the wreckage to Texas, and he does this whole press release where they have to say it was a weather balloon. See, you have General Ramey out there, and General Ramey has Marcel pose with a weather balloon, which is nothing like the wreckage that he saw, of course, which was a mile wide and had hieroglyphs on it and this weird memory metal. Now, Marcel himself said later that Ramey was putting out a cover story because they knew it was a UFO that had crashed, and they just wanted to get the press and the public off their back. And that's what they did. Now, interestingly enough, Marcel himself, his career, as soon as he was involved with this case, it seems like his whole career went down. And it's very interesting to note that Marcel and General Ramey had a pre-existing relationship, including the fact that they worked on the most secret nuclear tests on the Bikini Atoll Islands, and the nuclear activities that took place there. So long time before the Roswell case, you already had Marcel, incredibly high-ranking intelligence, dealing with nuclear secrecy, and Ramey, who is his superior officer. And so what Ramey does is he hears all of the facts about the crash, and he says, bring me the material, and we're going to do this for the press, get the press off our back, and then you're going to tell me exactly all the details around all this. And that's how it worked. But he instantly became very freaked out upon learning the nature of it and how public the whole thing was getting and getting ahead. And they knew that they had to cover it up, and cover it up they did. If you read some of those individual accounts, you're going to find them, intimidating witnesses and saying, we'll basically bury you in the desert. No one will ever find your bones. So So that's what they were able to pass off, which is, hey, it was a weather balloon. Forget about all that. Interestingly enough, in there is the famous Ramey memo, where he's holding this memo, and there's a few different shots of it. And over the years, what people have been able to make out by studying this is all the different words that were in the memo. And they've gotten pretty close to a complete version of it. Now, the thing that interests me, and it does talk about victims and a wreck and all the rest of it. So whatever he has in his hand, remember, this whole thing has happened so fast that he's getting the messages, and our friend Jesse Marcel is coming in, and the whole thing is working on this kind of incredible pace. So the researchers now have gone through that memo over time. They haven't got everything on it, but we know there's a number of things like, as I mentioned, crash. But there's a couple of things in here that I think apply directly to what I'm talking about as well. So part of the translation is the victims of the wreck are here at Fort Worth, Texas. Items on the ranch have been damaged. Some metal pieces were holding some metal pieces from the ranch. So that's the mention of the metal is in the actual telegram. And then material was flown by B-29. The victims of the wreck base are here. Victims, they got wreck, they've got metal, they've got, and so on, the translation goes. But right away, that metal becomes incredibly important. Now, Marcel, of course, attributed all these miraculous kind of qualities to it. It couldn't be burned. If you bent it, it went back to its normal shape. There was nothing that could be done. You couldn't cut it. And so they're fascinated by this. It becomes kind of the core of what they can figure out about this. And it becomes known as memory metal. That's the legend around it. What I'm going to do is read you a couple of comments that Marcel made himself about exactly what it was. And then we're going to backtrack that through the auspices of the very shady NRO and CIA aspects dealing with the actual record. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. I'm also going to bring in the testimony of Philip Corso, who worked directly moving out those projects into scientific availability for the government and keeping the rest very secret until a couple of years before his death, when he came out with all of it, right? Or was it all? Before we go any further, I want to remind you, especially if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in business and it keeps us in touch with you. And the way that that works is we have incredible censorship around this show because of the things that we reveal. And if you can have that direct pipeline with us, then we're doing well. Of course, what you'll find in that newsletter is just announcements of shows that are coming up, the incredible X series episodes that will blow your mind, interviews like you wouldn't believe coming up for you this spring. Just wait, it's off the charts. Documentaries, of course, the docuseries JFK and the UFO File, the Craze in the Hot Zone, that's Hacking Atlantis, and Pyramid X. All of those are dealing with these very deep subjects, and in some cases, ancient technology. And of course, the docuseries, as you know, we do those with a whole production team, and they're quite remarkable. But that's all for you there in the newsletter. So make sure you stand up and be counted. Go and get the free newsletter at darkjournalist.com to make sure that we can get this information to you and bypass so much of the social media, the different types of censorship that we experience. And it's quite remarkable. I won't even go into it, but whoa. What do you got over there?
David Termina, DJ. General Craigie was also the man who said that, contrary to John Trump, the U.S. government was highly interested in Tesla's death ray. He was in charge of redeveloping it at Wright-Patt, called quote, Project Nick.
Yeah. Now that's going places. Think about that. Think about that. That is incredible. And John Trump does come up again here tonight. Here's the quote from our friend Marcel. And this is from the original book now. And in this original book, you have a lot of the first blown testimony of Marcel and the first kind of groundbreaking. aspects. And I think it's a very rich book. This is the Berlitz Roswell book, all the way from 1981, I believe. And what they say is, I'll see if I can read this here. Can you describe the materials that you found at the site? This is Marcel now. There were all kinds of things, small beams about 3/8 of an inch square, some sort of hieroglyphics on them that nobody could decipher. Now, we've gone into the hieroglyphics here. Very unusual because it's a recurring theme around the UFO file. You have this hieroglyphics somehow on the material, sometimes on the craft, sometimes inside the craft. What is going on with the hieroglyphics? You have to understand that this could be also a connection to what we're talking about in terms of our ancient past. But moving right along, he said they were of the same weight, except they were not wood at all. He originally said that it kind of looks almost like balsa wood, but they were very hard, although flexible, and would not burn. There was a great deal of unusual parchment-like substance, which was brown in color and extremely strong. And a great number of small pieces of a metal like tinfoil, except that it wasn't tinfoil. I was interested in electronics and kept looking for something that resembled instruments or electronic equipment, but I didn't find anything. I was one of the other fellows, Cavett, I think, found a black metallic looking box several inches square. We never hear anything about the black metallic box. We hear about the metal. We hear about the hieroglyphs. What about this box? We never hear anything about it. As there was no apparent way to open it, and since it didn't appear to be an instrument package of any sort, it was too lightweight. We threw it in with the rest of the stuff. I don't know what eventually happened to the box, but it went along with the rest of the material we eventually took to Fort Worth. So the pattern of where it goes to Fort Worth and then out to Wright Pat is exactly as he's describing here. What was especially interesting about the material? One thing that impressed me was that the debris was the fact that a lot of it looked like parchment. It had little members and symbols that we had to call hieroglyphics because I could not understand them. These could not be read. They were just like symbols, something that meant something. And they were not all the same, but they were the same general pattern, I would say. They were pink and purple, and they looked like they were almost painted on. These little numbers could not be broken, could not be burned. These little members could not be broken, could not be burned. I even took my cigarette lighter and tried to burn the material we found that resembled parchment and balsa, but it would not burn, wouldn't even smoke. Something that is even more astounding is that the pieces of metal that we brought back were so thin, just like a tinfoil in a pack of cigarettes, I didn't pay too much attention to that at first until one of the boys came to me and said, you know, the metal that was in there, I tried to bend the stuff and it won't bend. I even tried it with a sledgehammer. You can't make a dent in it. That particular piece of metal was about 2 feet long and 1 foot wide. It was so light, it weighed nothing. Now, there's a number of other things that sometimes, you know, when they put the material out, it moves on the table where they lay it out. There's so many unusual stories about that metal. But think about it. After you've worked with that metal for 70, 75, 80 years, you've developed all these incredible projects out of it. And that's where we're going to go next with the testimony of Philip Corso. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, deep into the mystery UFO file prophecy in X-Series 219, Roswell, exotic tech, and nukes. And you can see there's a nuclear aspect hanging out in the background around all of this, including the fact that the 509th group that found all this wreckage was the only group that was authorized to drop the atomic bomb in the world at that point. And you can think about the lineage that comes up later when we get COG commanders, NORAD commanders who come directly out of this 509th group for years and years. So it might be that the 509th incident happened back in 1947, but that lineage in the background, maintaining the UFO file connection through these different things. I found a UFO connection with Raisin Kane, with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs now, and I'm still investigating it, but this guy was at Nellis Air Force Base, which is UFO Central. So stay tuned. What do you got?
You ever turn me in again? DJ, in the 70s, US labs were given some nitinol to create experimental engines that were essentially free energy machines. They said, quote, "Don't ask where it comes from. It's a gift from God."
Wow. Isn't that great? What's interesting is you have to put yourself in the mindset of these people, of course. And I think a lot of researchers have suggested that part of the problem with the UFO file and as it showed up for humanity is that UFOs themselves, really go on a tremendous uptick around World War II. There's no question about it. They appear for the first time on the public's radar, but of course, they've been there. There have been sightings for, thousands of years, in fact. But somehow, when we get into this period, atomic energy, light, all these different things, suddenly we're in a totally different ballgame, and we're dealing with groups that are more sophisticated than we are. Now, when you think about that and where the groups come from, there's a lot of different theories about that. Of course, the off-world aspect is huge in all of this. There are other ways to look at it also, that there's a group here that's more advanced, and we've talked about the differences on this. And I've given explanations like the Cosmos Club being related to some of that technology that was developed here, and how even though we attribute it to space and all the rest of it, and even the phenomena itself seems to go along with that, it's a good way to conceal it if you are here to get people looking somewhere else for where your activities are. But I have to say, it's quite possible it's all of the above. That's the nature of the problem.
Can I throw this out here?
Yeah.
So SB Harkin says, "Do demons need strange materials and energy sources for craft?" I ask you.
No.
Right.
No. We've put that out there before, that the demon thing around the UFO file is a cop-out, a dramatic cop-out. Now, you can definitely say that in terms of certain types of activities like UFO abduction and things like that, you could be dealing with supernatural entities. So I think that that's legitimate. But the idea that they've laid out there with, Luna and all that, oh, hey, I read the Book of Enoch once, and it talked about the Watchers. Well, if you do a deep dive on the Watchers, it sounds like a Nephilim group that's in charge of developing things here, and there's a whole spiritual component to that, but it goes a lot deeper than, hey, there's a bunch of demons flying around in those UFOs. It's tricky because when I go back to a lot of the Foo Fighters, when all these pilots are flying around in World War II and these things show up imitating them, and Gordon Cooper talks about that. And I've given that explanation where he said, when he was training in Germany in the early 50s, he was doing these flight patterns with his squadron, and that these UFOs would show up and do the same things with them, and then do them better, and then just take off at light speed or whatever. So you're dealing with a technological phenomena for sure. And so there's an intelligence involved, no question about it. The question is, what is it? And this has been gone after by some of the greatest minds, including people like John Mack and others. And he was trying to figure out the nature of it and how it related to consciousness and other things. I think it's a good way to go. I don't think chasing after the UFO file in a strictly nuts and bolts approach is the wisest thing to do. You need the other aspects to have it make sense. If you don't understand the psychic component related to the UFO file, you are going to wander around. And there's a lot of mimics around this, by the way, including the whole thing about psionics and everything that the CIA is trying to do. They're mimicking what you actually need, and they're giving it little marketing names so they can put these front people out there and brainwash the public about what the phenomena really is that has nothing to do with reality at all. This is the danger. So we stand at a very unusual place when they talk about disclosure. Now, I promised you I'd read again Trump's order. I'm just going to read this real briefly. Based on the tremendous interest shown, I'll be directing the Secretary of War and other relevant departments and agencies to begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified aerial phenomena, and unidentified flying objects. Yeah, it's UFOs straight up. And any and all other information connected to these highly complex but extremely interesting and important matters. God bless America. Now, it's interesting some of the things he doesn't say there, but it's certainly interesting the things that he puts on the record. And as I said, no other president has. Now, we had the whole skirmish with Obama coming up and saying, yeah, aliens are real on this podcast. And this announcement comes out right after, as I said, moving up Trump's announcement from what it was going to be. And the story about Trump's disclosure announcement also took some crazy turns in the past week or so, where the filmmaker in the UK, who originally started this rumor and said he got it from someone in the Trump administration, identified the person as Bob Bigelow. And Bigelow's not in the Trump administration, but he is a donor to the Trump administration. And he, of course, runs Bigelow Aerospace and all the rest. So it is weird that this floated around. In fact, there's something going on, of course, in relation to this. You've got all the disclosure movies coming up, Spielberg's movie. You have this S4 Bob Lazar movie coming out in April, Spielberg's in June, Disclosure Day. Then you have, Top Gun Maverick guys doing Top Gun UFO and using Grush as a consultant and all the rest. What I see is actually the intelligence agencies having hit a brick wall in the podcast space with what they wanted to do, but they did lay some kind of foundation for it as well. They were able to then parlay that and say, we're just going to jump, leapfrog over the whole thing, go into the movies aspect. We're going to portray the movies and pretend these guys are heroes, and then we'll have that beam back to the public, and they'll be watching in theaters or on Amazon or Netflix or something, and they'll get the impression that these counterintelligence people are agents that you should trust with the UFO file, and they'll tell you the history of it and all the rest. So this is the thrust of it. And it's been my belief, and the thing that I've put forward on the show, which is that they are moving towards a UFO threat as a setup for emergency powers. And that brings in the whole aspect around the continuity of government, which we talk about extensively on this program. I'm only going to mention it briefly here, but you have to keep it as a key factor in all of this. Yes, Miss Olivia.
DA says, if DJ had not been digging through all the aerospace UFO info and Roswell crash all these years, the medal and this missing scientist lady may not have ever been put together.
I think it's crucial. And you're right. By linking it, we get a fix on what's going on, I think. And then think back to all the different things that you've seen about the memory medal. It's happened over time. They've had it in specials. They've had it. But what does it represent? It represents an entirely different order of exotic technology. And then who knows what they were able to make it do. I mentioned Colonel Corso and some of the things that he claimed for it. I'm going to read some of that as well. And I wanted to point out that this character, Eric Burleson, the congressman from Missouri, who hangs out with Luna and Burchett, has been really saying a lot of weird stuff. I don't know how else to say it. I don't know where he's coming from, but he's putting himself out there with these outrageous statements. And I've highlighted him before, but he said, U.S. Congressman claims crashed UFO is so big they've built an entire building. Right? That's Burleson. Where are you getting that, Burleson? What are you talking about? Over and over again, his outrageous statements are what you're going to see on Twitter or wherever. And there's something about Burleson. He's the point man for saying the big, gigantic thing. And now he's saying, I'm not suicidal in my tweets and, all this stuff. Here he goes. This is interesting. In a rather fascinating update, Eric Burleson has disclosed that a new government organization has been established to investigate unidentified anomalous phenomena operating at a level above the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO. AARO was set up by Rubio and Gillibrand. And that whole thing was meant to be a UFO defense office, get a slush fund going, billions and billions of dollars to fight those aliens. the Golden Dome being right in the heart of that. Yeah, what do you got?
SV Harkin, who has a lot of stuff I'm going to share later, it says Burchett for sure, but I think Burleson and Luna also work for Musk.
Oh, interesting.
Can I actually get into all the Elon stuff?
Sure.
Okay. So again, SV Harkin. The weirdo at the center of this is Elon. If he wants to put NASA more and more out of the picture for America First network cities and mainland fascism, then he might need her for the alloy. Her alloy allows for the top of the line rocket engines, and Elon wants that for SpaceX and only for SpaceX.
Oh, no, who's she? Who's she? You're talking about Reza, Monica Reza.
Exactly.
So the suggestion there is that Elon Musk somehow was involved with getting the materials from this kidnapped scientist. Is that the idea?
Precisely. It's a theory. She was producing the alloy. Elon probably wants McCaslin because of his knowledge about space weaponry. And though he's not supposed to, he may want to put weapons on his satellites. Interesting.
I'll tell you this about Elon Musk and the way that we need to look at him the way we'd look at a Howard Hughes type guy. I would never attribute that type of decision making or dynamism to him. I think he's somebody who operates under controls. And when you have people being disappeared and things like that, it's coming out of a branch of an intelligence service of some kind, enforcement unit. That's where I would go originally. But I will say this about Musk, that he knows a great deal and that he's one of these figures that, he can't operate without DARPA's permission. He can't operate without the secret space program's permission. So he's kind of the front man in the middle of all that. And that's how I would see someone like him. But there could be forces around SpaceX and things like that were doing exactly what you're talking about. It is certainly possible. One other thing I wanted to mention, I wanted to get this in there about the type of being. Now, one of the things that Marcel told a researcher, and this wasn't widely known, she came out with a lot of this information and taped recordings of him before he passed away, where he said there are a number of things that I saw that I can't reveal. And if I were to reveal them, it would basically, for the sake of my country and for the sake of the world isn't ready yet, that kind of thing. So you see, Marcel also saw bodies, and we have to keep all that in mind as we go along. Now, one of the cases of encountering these beings and being abducted by them is the famous Betty and Barney Hill case. I go back to this case because over and over again, I think it's the original template for so much of what took place. And therefore, I think it's uncluttered by some of the projections that would happen when people would have. There were so many great abduction cases after the fact, but this one, when it came up, there was no precedent really for it. So the being that Betty Hill encounters is Junior. And
I never get tired of Junior.
There's something about Junior, I would say, we know we're dealing with something there, but it looks very much like a person. It does not look like a bug-eyed gray. And in fact, she would reject over and over again that type of, kind of characterization. This is the one that Charlie Fultz saw up in the Allagash. That, as he described it, a bug in spandex, that being there is totally different. It has nothing in common with regular human form, except for the head and shoulders, I guess. But you have to kind of put yourself in the mindset of these are people now who have experienced this thing, seen this thing. So therefore, on some other level, in this kind of collective unconscious way, we have all experienced and seen the thing. So the question is, going to our own subconscious intuition and saying, what is it? Right? What is this? What is it that we're dealing with? And you can kind of have your own answer for it. I know you've spent many, many hours researching it and thinking about it, but we all have a feeling, maybe, especially the more intuitive types, of what it is we're dealing with here. And there's a deep, somebody like Gigi Young, for example, our friend Gigi, she has such an incredible way of looking at this subject. It's very important, I think. So we need to understand this aspect of the beings before I mention the next piece here about Corso. But we're running late at this point, so I'm going to do, Miss Olivia, is turn everything over to you and your
Oh,
questions, and I'll roll in the quotes.
okay. All right.
Everyone,
where
you're
to
watching the
start?
Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 219, the mystery UFO file prophecy, Roswell, exotic tech, and nukes. And of course, that prophecy was contained in the Delshow paintings. And part of that prophecy was Trump in 45. It's undeniable. Question is, if Trump is the UFO disclosure president, what does that prophecy mean? Where does it take us? That's what we're going to explore here and examine. Yes.
Dear Termina, DJ, there is testimony from this same group at Battelle conducted psychic research to determine if nitinol could be morphed using the mind alone. And then Kontiki Man says there is a difference between nitinol, which was developed by Navy Intel, and mandalloy, a nickel-based alloy reverse engineered from something at Wright Pat for a new type of rocket engines at Aerojet Rocketdyne, R&D by Air Force and Aerojet Rocketdyne. Weird rivalry. Wondering whether DJ thinks X-Protect is kind of split between the Navy Intel and Air Force Intel.
No question. No question. There is a rivalry in the background between those two. And there was a certain point where the Air Force was right up front and had it. But it was always really the Navy in the Navy domain. This is the strangeness going on there because, you kind of get to those splits in the military as part of the National Security Act. And then the Central Intelligence Agency becomes the overlord of the entire process. And everyone is afraid of answering up to the CIA on this. Of course, in the case of Kecksburg from 65, you've got the hieroglyphs again on the acorn-shaped craft. So here you are dealing again with hieroglyphs. I think if you want to settle, or at least get some idea, I don't think you're going to settle in one lifetime, any of this, by the way. But I think if you want to get an idea of what's going on in relation to the UFO file, you have to get to the bottom as a research entity, as a research group, of the hieroglyphs. Because what is that denoting? What's going on there? And how does it relate to our own history in relation to this? You have to go there as an aspect. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Deep State, you're fired. So does that imply that these plasma scientists and others could be the ones who could debunk fake alien invasion, and that's why they are getting? Were they removed just like the COVID holistic doctors, right? In advance of a psyop.
Excellent point. Excellent point. One thing I can say from studying Cold War histories and things, that scientists and military people who are working on science projects, especially of a highly compartmentalized, secretive nature, like the UFO file, and the groups in the back, the enforcement groups that make sure things come out the way that they want them, the X-Protect type groups, they are they're high value. And they know, they're aware when they sign on that they become targets for this type of activity. But we also should know that there's a gigantic surveillance program involved, which, as I alluded to last week, may even include injecting sensors and things into the body that can be tracked so that you never lose a person. It's like, they were talking about how when they were looking for McCaslin, that they had an unusually warm spring going on, or kicking into spring here, a warm March, and that the heat sensors that they were doing were just giving them all these different heat signatures. It's my belief that somebody on his level would have an injectable tracker as part of his biophysical dynamic, and that they would be able to track him via his physical marker. So that's what happens on that level. And I also know that when they talk on government levels, they don't always want their enemies to know that that's what's going on, and that there are ways to track these people that go far beyond, using heat sensors, things like that. And I understand that, but we have to, for purposes of finding the general or what happened to him, what took place, we need to apply the actual knowledge. The actual knowledge is these people are, they have biophysical markers and they're able to be tracked by a system for that very reason. Just like we have facial recognition and all that. You think in the military they don't have it for somebody as high value as our friend McCaslin? Now, all about Alternative 3 and, there's all kinds of interesting things about Alternative 3, including the fact that it started out as a serious thing and then they did it as a spoof documentary and freaked a bunch of people out in England. The book came out, and then, but the fundamental idea was that they were kidnapping these scientists to make them part of this secret program, basically a secret space program. And the element of that and how they're developing the space infrastructure and how they need people on that level, there could be competing groups here that are involved that make the whole situation on the surface. It's much easier to just explain, well, the guy walked away and disappeared, As to whether or not he met with foul play, that's another strange aspect to all this. And they don't seem to think so in any of the traditional public. The authorities aren't giving us anything like that, for example. But I want to mention something in terms of disappearances that would go take us back to the Roswell thing again. Now, Mac Brazel, of course, is the rancher who took care of the ranch for the Fosters. In Roswell Reignited, the series we did last summer, which was really off the charts and the implications of which are still, staggering through. But one of the things that happened there is we discovered that somebody who was very involved in the Kennedy assassination had this huge Roswell connection, which is that the person who found the weapon that was purported to be Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle in the Texas School Book Depository, his name was Deputy Sheriff Boone. And he was a young guy. He was 24 years old. And what he did very shortly after the Kennedy assassination is they took over all of the company of the Fosters, or the Foster Ranch people who ran the Roswell Ranch and who had hired Mac Brazel. Now, that group themselves are very interesting, the Fosters, and the whole way that they were to handle this. There's a lot of things about the Roswell Ranch also after the crash, including the fact that nothing could be grown there, and it was restricted under government order that you not, do things like raise animals or raise crops and things of that nature. So whatever it was that took place there, you have to know it's on this level where the government deems it's dangerous. And there's a reason for that. What I would say is part of the thing that will help us in looking at all these things is to get us on this level of looking at the connections around it. So in Brazel's case, he originally went to the sheriff and he went to the other people and said, there's this incredible stuff all over my land. And then Marcel comes out and he observes the ranch and he said it was so far out there. It took most of the day just to drive there. And he said the thing was sprawled across his ranch, like for a mile across. And it was massive amounts of the debris. So you have to keep that in mind first. It wasn't some little weather balloon somewhere. This is massive. One of the other interesting things is that Brazel himself says, you know what? First thing I noticed was that all of this debris and stuff, my animals wouldn't go anywhere near it. So I couldn't get them across to the other side where they needed to go. And so the animals instantly had a fear of this material. That's another kind of dead giveaway for what it was. But when he goes in and tells the sheriff and all the rest of it, suddenly all the bells and whistles go off. But he does give an interview and he talks about it. And then, he has this whole thing with Marcel. Now, very shortly after that, he's grabbed by the army, and then these intelligence people come in and they really give him a hard time. And so basically the idea is that he's bought off. So, never talk about it again. And he has to recant even that he saw this and all the rest. Brazel would leave and move to Montana. But a very unusual thing happened, which was that his son disappeared. And there were sightings of him later. And his disappearance was almost like, in my opinion, when looking at this whole story, was kind of like a warning in the background. But very, very unusual all around. And the missing person aspect, again, you have a little bit of that in the early part of the UFO file with the Maury Island case, where you have the person who experiences the UFO, sending this slag onto his boat and destroying the boat, killing his dog, and injuring his child's arm. And then the original Men in Black types come and visit him and say, don't talk about this, and you have to go to the authorities and say you were hoaxing. And he says, I'm not going to do that. And they say, well, then we're going to take your son. And in fact, the son disappears. He's a 15-year-old teenage boy, and he disappears for 3 months and turns up in this town in Utah. And has no memory of anything. He's washing dishes. So, the way that these things work and who's operating in the background, missing persons is a real signature of what they do. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 219. Miss Olivia, your questions are in the spotlight.
Okay. So I have a good one. SM Duffy, have you looked into the recent video, police body cam, of a guy detained at Area 51 who claimed he was involved with NASA, Redstone et al., with time dilation happening there?
I saw a weird story about that, but I haven't really got into it. If you want to send me that and details on it, send it to admin@darkjournalist.com. That's the best email address to reach me. I go through those all the time. And that goes for anyone out there. If you want to contact me, admin@darkjournalist.com is the way to go. You can even put that in the chat if you want. You want to put that in the chat? Admin@darkjournalist?
I'm sorry, I am distracted by a master troll who admits that he is drunk, but he is donating a lot. So,
oh, that's good.
There we go. You need to give me a minute to recenter. All right. So
everyone, I want to mention this. What I'll do is I'll read this quote from Philip Corso, who actually inherited the Roswell things, and I'll let you get some questions.
Mm-hmm.
How does that sound?
Sounds perfect.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. If you are really in the ufologist side, if you've got that, interest deep down, this book, The Day After Roswell. It is such a fascinating book, and it has so many important keys and leaks and links in it that I still highly recommend it, although the co-author apparently put some fluff on the top in order to try to make the book more palatable to the public. Corso still thought there was enough hardcore truth in it to put it out. And his own past, I think, becomes the most honest aspect of the entire thing. Here's a few things that he had to say. Of course, this also ties in directly because he was talking about how they took the materials from the Roswell crash and then they sent them through the Foreign Technology Office as a way to hide them in moving through the government process. And one of the things that happened there is he took over at a certain point and he was managing it. And it's well documented that General Trudeau was his, the officer was in charge of all of his projects. That general gave him incredible duties relating to secrecy. And Corso's background is so hardcore from Eisenhower through Kennedy and others. I mean, this guy had an incredible background, and I don't think that ufology showed him the right kind of respect when he came out, because later on you get these really kind of half-baked characters like Elizondo and, like real CIA people had nothing to do with telling you the truth. Okay. This is part of what Corso had to tell us about this. In 1961, the Air Force began 2 secret projects that, in effect, had been in operation since 1947. And they had not committed them to policy. Moondust had to do with the establishment of recovery teams to retrieve and recover crashed or grounded foreign space vehicles, UFOs, right? But for all intents and purposes, as far as the public was concerned, the Air Force was looking for Soviet satellites that had fallen out of the sky. But in reality, the Air Force was establishing a recovery of UFOs program, just like the Army had pulled the crashed UFO out of the New Mexico desert 14 years earlier. Now, this is important because we're in 61. This is the Kennedy era, so listen closely. In Project Blue Fly, the Air Force authorized the immediate delivery of foreign crash space vehicles and any other item of intelligence and technical intelligence interest to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. There it is again, right in the heart of all this redevelopment. It was a repeat of General Twining's retrieval of the Roswell space vehicle from the 509th to Wright Field in 1947. Again, the big aspect going directly to Wright-Patterson. You get the crash in New Mexico, Roswell, New Mexico, Wright-Patterson. The Aztec crash, Wright-Patterson. All of the crashes under Blue Fly, Wright-Patterson. In 62, one of the assistants to the Secretary of Defense, Arthur Sylvester, told the press at a briefing that if the government deemed it necessary for reasons of national security, it would not even furnish information about UFOs to Congress, let alone the American public. You see, this is where all of this comes from. Now, I was at the Pentagon and I fully understand how this information was kept. And he was talking about, yeah, I understand secrecy, but the problem is the secrecy grew into this Frankenstein, and suddenly they were just all dealing with each other, and the public and the Congress and any kind of oversight were cut out. So then what happens? How do the people on the inside who want to deal with this fairly and move it forward prevent it from getting into the hands of an X-Protect style group? It's an excellent question. Okay. Now, there's a piece in here where he mentions John Trump in relation to the Tesla files. I wanted to bring this in because this is before there was much that was out there about John Trump in relation to this. We put most of that on the record ourselves with the Tesla Trump and the time capsule, and we brought forward the information about John Trump connection to the UFO file. But here's what he had to say about it. Tesla's papers remained in storage in Manhattan until the early 1950s when they were returned to Yugoslavia. Yet even after their return, the Yugoslavian government believed the FBI had rifled through Tesla's papers when they were in storage and had microfilmed them and photographed them. J. Edgar Hoover denied this, but photostatic copies of photographs of Tesla's papers were in possession of the Army's R&D Foreign Technology Desk. When I took over in 1961, how did they get there? Tesla's property was officially seized by the U.S. government 2 days after his death, even though the FBI knew that Tesla had publicly said he'd perfected his death ray. There was no independent verification of this. No steps have been taken by the government to prevent him from transferring his plans for the death ray to foreign powers. Vice President Henry Wallace, however, told the FBI that the government had a critical interest in whatever papers Tesla had and instructed the FBI to seize them any way that they could. That's why the FBI directed the Office of Alien Property to enter Tesla's hotel room January 9th, 1943, and take possession. Tesla's other papers were already in the storage warehouse and were seized by the Office of Alien Property. Now they send in the FBI and everyone else. They say, who should we do? Who's our top man in all this that can handle the papers of Tesla and tell us what was going on? That's when they send in Dr. John Trump. So Trump's uncle, is on one hand very well versed with the UFO file, the protege of Vannevar Bush, but he is also the Tesla man in the background. He's the one appointed to go in there and say, Tesla's information didn't have any bearing, all the rest, and come forward with that false public notion so they can work on his actual papers in the background. In Washington, he sent a military courier to take possession of them and bring back to Wright-Patterson. Although there was some correspondence between the OAP and the Air Technical Service Command over the next 2 years regarding the disposition of the papers, at least one of General Twining's officers at Air Material Command contacted the Office of Alien Property in November 1947 to tell them that the AMC at Wright Field had possession of the Tesla papers and would maintain possession of them for at least until January 1948. Look, when you get into this, it's quite fascinating because what's going on with Tesla and his papers and the process there is very similar to what we have with the UFO file. In fact, what they wanted to know from John Trump was, is there something in here? This is what they asked him, and this is what he said at the end of his life. It's on video. It's very easy to get. I have 10 hours of video of John Trump speaking at the end of his life. And he says, what they asked me was, we want information regarding taking flying objects down at a tremendous distance. So you're there in Manhattan or whatever, you press a button, something's going over the UK and it comes down. But the flying objects part was the strange part because we had planes, you know, we had jets and other things. Flying objects, you have to think about it this way. So they were looking at something that could take down the flying saucers. That is the thrust of it, in my opinion. And that's the thing. That's why they sent in the expert, John Trump, because expert John Trump would know about these things. And you could certainly say, well, he was looking for the death ray or whatever. Well, that could be true, but he's saying the specific instructions from the FBI agents were about this device that could pull things down at a tremendous distance. So I've called that the Melchizedek device based on all the information I've collected on this. Now, there are episodes after episodes dealing with this Melchizedek device, and I highly recommend them. The Brother Sunburst episodes about how that was all moved and how, of all people, Brian De Palma's the director, his brother was somebody who was in charge of helping to move this along with this mysterious character, Brother Sunburst. The Melchizedek device has to figure in here. And the more I go into things like Corso's information, the more substantial that whole piece is. But one of the things I wanted to mention here, just to round out all of this is how Corso kind of sums it up in terms of our position in relation to the off-world visitors, those who are flying around in the spacecraft. He says that at least one copy of Tesla's monograph has remained in the possession of the working group under General Twining and has made its way to the Advanced Research Projects Agency in Washington over the course of the following 10 years. It was pulled out when the working group realized that upon the launch of Sputnik, the United States had absolutely no defense against war in space being initiated by the Russians, nor against the EBEs, right? Extraterrestrial biological entities. This is the way he's putting it there in 1997. We had one vital clue, however, about the only possible process that could interfere with the electromagnetic field drive we suspected the aliens were using, a directed particle energy beam weapon that could disrupt the electromagnetic wave formation around the spacecraft and penetrate their anti-gravity field. Well, what does that sound like? It sounds like the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. There's no question about it. So if we can put these things together in context, if we can take people who were there and put things out on the record, he's talking about a particle beam weapon. He goes on to say that SDI, Star Wars, was set up as a gigantic UFO grid to basically send missiles after these UFOs as they were coming in. And there was a whole menacing aspect of us versus them there. This is his version of the UFO threat, I suppose. But what I would say, it's fascinating that President Trump now is initiating the Golden Dome, which is SDI on steroids. It's a $300 billion project, and that's part of the whole Greenland aspect, which is we're going to need this dome, you know, that goes all the way over North America and nothing can get in. Well, this is, again, working directly off of that UFO grid formula. And that is where we're right in the heart of all this. We have to understand these things and see them in context so that when Trump is talking about the Golden Dome and they're like, oh, you know, this is some crazy project about missiles and missile defense and all the rest of it. We have to understand what it is before we can decide if it's worthwhile or not. Or since it's so geared up and the people who were involved with it are so, you know, wrapped up around surveillance, for example, it could be very dangerous for us to have the Golden Dome as well. What I want to point out is the company that McCaslin was working for after he retired was called Blue Halo. There's Blue again. And what were they trying to do? They were trying to become the main player on the Golden Dome UFO defense grid project. And here's Trump announcing disclosure. Are the bells starting to ring now? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 219, the mystery UFO file prophecy, Roswell, exotic tech, and nukes. Well, we've covered quite a bit of it here tonight, but now, Miss Olivia, the rest of your question.
Okay, David Shermina. DJ, it seems a strong possibility that the Nixon time capsule formula could be the formula to make the authentic memory metal from Roswell.
Oh, wow. Well, it's an excellent point. And this is something that they devised, based on long sessions with the being that they had. So, this is the nature of the question about what was going on there with the Nixon time capsule story. And I absolutely agree. I think that what could have been happening literally is that the formula there related directly to something that came from a crash retrieval like Roswell. And I think this is the missing chapter, the missing piece in history, as it were. So we need to really acknowledge that. And what else have you got?
SB Harkin wants to know, do you think it's weird that they would release that to the media about these drones? Wouldn't they keep that to themselves? I mean, that's an embarrassment, that they would even allow drones over secure, should be secure areas. So what are they doing by telegraphing that publicly?
Well, what you're looking at is there's groups dealing with how to portray a threat. And then there are others who need to put out these types of press releases. When it was happening over New Jersey, for example, Trump said, I promise when I get in, I'm going to tell you exactly who it was. And then he got in and he couldn't tell. So that shows you that some exercise, something was going on there that did not reach up to a level where a president could talk about it. But it's absurd because you have, tons and tons of reports. And this is something where I think the mainstream media failed on one end, but the independent media failed the stress test on that one as well. And they got tremendous feedback in those programs. If you think about it, they were doing data mining about how the public would respond to a sky event and what took place in that sky event. That's how we have to think about this. Those groups got tremendous info in the background. Now, you could look at it also and say, well, they knew all along this was just some kind of weird test and everyone went along with it. It seemed to me there was genuine, freaky things going on, like I said, with the Trump drone busters and everything else. The other thing that was going on is there were Congress people pushing this idea that there was an Iranian mothership that was sending these around. Do you remember that? So dangerous, I would say.
Wait,
there were a lot
why
of
don't you
dangerous
review
tones.
that story a little bit.
Well, that's pretty much it. I mean,
Where was that supposed to have been?
It was a congressman, and he was from New Jersey, and he was putting it out there that this is all an Iranian mothership that was putting these drones out, and that we needed to address this as a national security matter.
Now with the Iran war and everything, this hits a little differently.
It does, yes, absolutely. All right, what else you got?
Okay, so I'm going to go there. So Connectomatic wants to know, does DJ think McCaslin is alive?
Well, it doesn't seem very likely, does it? I would think as the more time goes by that, in a technical, regular scenario, I would say no. But I would also say that with the McCaslin story, you could be looking at an individual who was grabbed and put in a program, a scientific redevelopment program. But even in a case like that, I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to say. And there's a lot of sensitivity there in dealing with the families and everything else. I can only hope if someone related to McCaslin were watching this show, I would say this, that the only thing that's important is that if we put the facts out there in some way, it can help get us in some picture of what this guy was into, one, and what his associates were into regarding, Wright Patterson, you're dealing with a very, very high level. And if you go back, as I mentioned, to SDI in the 1980s, you look at that wave of scientists who were taken out, the Marconi scientists case, It's generally referred to. But there's about 22 different scientists that, you know, have car accidents or disappear under mysterious circumstances. We have to keep that in mind as we're going along here. There are programs when things get up to a certain point, and regular dialogue between these groups doesn't work. Yes.
Blazing River. So this general went missing just before we struck Iran.
Yes.
What
And
do you make of that?
right after the announcement that, and the way that it happens, it looks to me like it wasn't planned. That's the weirdness. It looks like this happened on the run, kind of. But the way that it happened is quite unusual, because when you look at McCasland, the announcement comes out from Trump, then he's doing his normal routine in the morning, and as I said, a workman shows up. His wife goes out to do some errands. When she comes back, he's gone, and he doesn't take his glasses with him, and he doesn't take his phone. Well, he always wore his glasses, and he always had his phone. So that's strange. They've never found his gun. He was packing his gun. Someone took his gun. They don't know. These are the open-ended questions. And originally they came out with this silver alert, and the idea was, he has Alzheimer's. He doesn't know where he is. Please help find him. And the wife came out immediately and said, no. Law enforcement also was like, no, he doesn't have any of those issues. He had a very kind of mild case of mental fog sometime in the past few years, and he got some medication for it. He's not anything like that. As a matter of fact, a major general like him is incredibly disciplined through years and years of training, and they know, they're built to fight wars and things like that. So they know not to kind of just drift off into the woods. None of that story adds up, unfortunately. And it is sad. That's the other part of it. I had something else to quote here from, it's the hieroglyphic drawing piece. I just want to quote this real briefly, that Jesse Marcel put this down in one of his last interviews. So he says, this is something that we never deciphered what it was. There's a lot of it. I brought some stuff to her, my wife, and my wife saw it. And the woman who's interviewing is named Linda, and she asked the wife, was it drawings or what? And then the wife chimes in and says, I was the first one to say that it was hieroglyphics of some sort. And then Linda says, you were the first to say that. Mrs. Marcel says, yeah, but I wouldn't know what it was. Then Jesse Marcel says, they tried to decipher that stuff. They never did. And then Linda says, well, the book said something about it didn't have drawings of animals. Other than that, it looked exactly like hieroglyphics. And then the wife chimes in and says, yeah, it looked like some kind of symbols. I should have said symbols instead of hieroglyphics. And then Jesse goes on to say, I tried to draw it. It was so irregular. And then he does, in fact, make a version of it. And before we're done here, I'll show that as well. Yes, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
I thought when I saw the new version, it looked more like math equations.
Interesting.
Than hieroglyphics.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to keep going on the general.
Yes,
okay.
Please.
So Mike Back, does Daniel think it is possible that the general is somehow behind his own disappearance? I guess we're really talking intuition here more than anything else.
Yeah,
because what do
sure.
we have for facts?
Well, we've laid out the facts as they've put them across. I think what's crucial is the tip-off of the whole thing is the long email to Podesta about McCasland and how he had control over the Roswell material. That puts him at a very high level of managing the UFO file. When we understand people are on that level, for example, they become targets for all sorts of mischief, like what we're talking about. But there are defense systems for it. And you don't just go wandering around when you're that high prize of a target. So something is amiss in the explanation of what took place with the general's disappearance. And I think it's interesting what that volunteer put on the record in a news story yesterday. He said, there are no law enforcement people up here looking for him. So there's some other group, inside of that program that manages the UFO file that is, they'd be in charge of this. And so you wouldn't find that falling under, FBI or whatever it happens to be, but they don't talk about those groups. So keep that in mind and keep us on that tip as we go. But I think it's very clear that something took place there that was related directly to his work on the UFO file. Yeah, unfortunately.
24 Baby Bull. McCaslin was allegedly posting on X under a pseudonym Electric Propulsive Spacecraft Systems.
Yeah.
Have you checked out that X account?
I did, yeah. There were some things also about other accounts that could have been his, but unfortunately, those aren't confirmed, so they could be anybody. So therefore, you can't take them too seriously. One of them did refer to a general, another general, and said that this general didn't actually, that general on the record had committed suicide. And one of these accounts said, no, that general didn't commit suicide. Somebody had done this for him, basically, and made it look like suicide. So there were some weird pieces, but nothing you could really connect with McCaslin. So, it just sort of hangs out there. But I think we have such a dramatic, with his assistant disappearing, we have dramatic connections here. And if we can start to maneuver this through the idea of the memory metal and the advanced technology involved in the memory metal that comes out of the UFO file, the whole case might be, explosive in that sense. Yes.
Humanara, question, DJ, what do you make of the fact that Kirtland Air Force Base in the Sandia National Laboratories, just south of where Major General William McCaslin went missing, near the Sandia Mountains? Don't forget that Paul Benowitz claimed to have discovered a secret network of alien UFO bases near Kirtland.
Yes.
Which again is just south of where he went missing.
Excellent point. That whole area, once you get into Sandia, that is such a hardcore, the secrecy level on that is not to be believed. A lot of that reminds me of characters who were eliminated by the X-Protect group. And one of them was James McDonald. And McDonald originally had a disappearing act. He had disappeared for a while. Then he showed up in a hospital with an unusual thing. He had shot himself. But he had just injured his eye and he was in the hospital there. And then he took off supposedly from the hospital and was found 5 miles from there. And he was dead. McDonald, if you go back and check, was one of the most respected scientists around the UFO field and had pushed the envelope and had really, he knew all the ins and outs about what was going on there. In fact, he had even met with Lloyd Berkner, who was the physicist who was in charge of the Robertson panel of the UFOs. And so when you think about all that, and he was also the, as we've done documentaries on Lloyd Berkner, he was the person that President Kennedy was going to meet at the Trade Mart to make this incredible speech that they never got to make together. When you get around characters like that, when you think about somebody like Berkner, who'd been to Antarctica, with Byrd in 1929, here he's working now with McDonald, and they're working on the UFO file, and they're working from an X-share type perspective. So, you're getting into interesting territory, and McDonald had given testimony before Congress. The Condon Committee had come out. They tried to marginalize him in so many different ways. And this is somebody who, had interacted with and given reports to the President Johnson at the time. So what takes place is he gets these threats occasionally about his work. And then suddenly his wife finds he doesn't come home, and she finds him in the hospital a few days later with this weird eye injury. And then he, as I mentioned, stumbles down the highway for 4 or 5 miles and supposedly rolls off the side of the road. And, so what's happening in those cases, in my opinion, is when people get really close on that UFO truth front, then they encounter this type of activity. And in his case, he disappeared, but he turned up in a hospital. Yes.
Hold on, let me find.
Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 219, the mystery UFO file prophecy, Roswell exotic tech and nukes revealed. We'll take a couple more questions from you here tonight, and then we'll wrap up tonight's show. I also want to mention, if you're new here, go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch through all the massive censorship that we've been seeing around dealing with these issues. It also lets you know about the incredible episodes that we have coming up for you. And Miss Olivia, you're up.
Yeah, for Termina. DJ, recently discovered intel shows that Lawrence Craigie was chosen by influential General Gordon Seville to be his successor in the creation of NORAD COG.
Well, the connection, what we try to put across, actually, that's the thing I did cover last week. And I could have covered it more in this episode, but there's more of it coming up, which is all about AmeriCom. And if you understand the continuity of government program, that's the thing that operates on the secrecy level, like the UFO file. So the continuity of government program, when they talk about massive underground bases and all these types of things, that's all COG. And the lack of oversight on COG is one of these strange things in history, that it goes more and more, off the reservation, and then becomes its own underground government, as it were. Now, when you look at something about the crisscross between the UFO file and the continuity of government program, they both exist in this twilight of secrecy. So it's very hard to get any real information about what it is. And because of that secrecy, it's a kind of a secrecy fiefdom. And so you have incredible researchers over the years trying to track down the activities of the continuity of government group. And the very best, of course, is Peter Dale Scott. And what he discovered about the continuity of government group is that every deep event in American history, from the Kennedy assassination through Watergate and 9/11, Iran-Contra, the COVID op, and what have you, basically the financial coup d'etat of 2008, all kinds of COG people were all involved in all of those events. They had all come out of the COG background. And they had, in fact, some of them had contributed to continuity of government program, which was originally set up to survive a nuclear attack. And you would want a functioning government, underground, if that had happened and the leadership was decapitated. So we don't have a very good idea about COG. They kind of put it out there more now. And like I said, during the COVID operation, they even had the Northcom general at the time coming out and being like, yeah, But the NORAD commander in 2023 did something very interesting, and that was General Van Herk, which is, he gave this press conference when all those balloons and things were happening and the shoot downs were happening. And he was working with a journalist at the New York Times in this kind of Q&A back and forth. And he starts, they start going back and forth about, could this be an extraterrestrial shoot down? And he's saying, I'm not ruling anything out. It could be extraterrestrial. That's the guy who would have taken over in the event of the COG switch getting pulled. And you have to think of it like this, that in an emergency, continuity of government takes over. And that is a martial law setup. There's no way around it. And that kind of martial law, that piece needs to be triggered by something massive. So it would have to be the ultimate, cyber hack, a chaos in society, a nuclear explosion, or a UFO threat takeover. And there's no question for me that the COG secrecy and the UFO file secrecy represent a great danger to society, in the sense that they operate in completely covert ways. Their budgets are covert, and the mere existence is covert in many ways, because many of the groups that are already operating with the UFO file, we don't have anything to do with them in a public way. So we have nothing. There's no group that we can point to and say they're managing the UFO file, right? And yet, if you look and you can find the X-Protect personnel, just like you can find the COG personnel, COG is more known than the UFO file personnel because it's on record. But the way that it operates is so secret that the people who've operated in those bunkers and things, they can't even tell their spouse that what it's about, And what I've heard about it is that it's a whole underground world, and that we're talking about apartment buildings and shopping malls and everything, like high tech rail and all kinds of things. So there is a point at which that secret underground world will interface with this public world. And, it's going to be an incredible surprise. Just that. Forget about encountering aliens. How about a whole society underground that's been built on our money? That's pretty interesting. What do you got?
Okay. Kontiki Man says, with all these shenanigans, isn't there a chance that COG has been captured by whatever interest group and that it no longer serves the originator's goal? And Deep State You're Fired says, DJ, do you think the Q movement was a cover-up type psyop to get us to accept COG?
Oh, yeah. Q was certainly a very sophisticated psyop, but you see them now, and they operate as podcasts in the so-called independent media, and they use the exact same points that Q did. So it's a gigantic intel operation, but it's a marketing operation too. And they'll get you. They'll get you going after, is Bridget McCron a man or whatever? Nothing that you'll find useful in life. I can tell you that. What's interesting to me is how much of a push was going on before the Iran war. And I think what was happening there was, there was a level of distraction that was just off the charts. And a lot of times I hear, people, if they're not familiar with the UFO subject, they'll say things like, oh, UFOs are just a distraction or whatever. No, it's the opposite, actually. They try to distract you away from finding out what the UFO file is really all about. And its incredible position, I don't want to overstate its position, but just to give you an idea of it, I would say, going back to Sarbarker's statement, which goes all the way back to 1950, if the UFO file is on a higher level of secrecy than our nuclear secrets, you can only imagine the kind of apparatus that's attached in order to secure that secrecy. And if none of that is public, you've got a gigantic infrastructure operating here. So when Trump is coming forward and saying, I want all these agencies to release their UFO material, that is one kind of last gasp to try to bring that breakaway system back underneath some type of executive umbrella and say the president's in control of this, which technically he should be. That's what President Kennedy understood. And that's where the Central Intelligence Agency engaged him and said, this is a need to know type situation. We can handle this. And he said, no, I need all the high threat cases. I'm going to share them with the Russians. This is such a big moment in history. And I emphasize it because there's so much on the record about it now that we can really bring so much of this out. And I think it would help us manage the situation we're in now, because unfortunately, you're still getting, we think because we've discovered that there's a deep state, and because we've discovered there's a UFO X-Protect and all the rest. That's good. That's a good start. But now you have to deal with the fact that you have a deep state and all the rest, because those things are very much in control, including the fact, as I started the show off, they want $200 billion for a war in Iran that none of us voted for. We voted for the opposite, in fact. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 219. This is the mystery UFO file prophecy, Roswell, exotic material, and nukes. And we have some good jokers out there tonight and some great comments in the ideas room. We're going to take 2 more questions from you tonight, and Miss Olivia is going to put them together now.
Yeah, I actually wanted to, now that you brought up money again, Scarlet Fire says $1 trillion equals $5 million per day for 547 years, in case anyone is wondering.
Oh, yeah.
So, This is
Costly.
this is costly. I
Yeah.
mean, we were talking about this earlier, this cost benefit ratio.
Yes.
I mean, like,
Yes.
yeah, would it be nice to have Iran be different?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But, how much is it literally, how much is it going to cost us?
No question.
Children, grandchildren, just everything, like, and the world, and
Yes.
all the cascading effects, right? We have to think this through. We went through Iraq and Afghanistan. We're supposed to have learned some wisdom from that.
Well, it's interesting. You're absolutely correct. Look, we lost blood and treasure in the Iraq War. We lost so many great people dedicated to this country. The people of Iraq suffered as a result of that. It was the biggest foreign policy blunder up to that point, just like Vietnam had been the biggest foreign policy blunder. Before that, this is a terrible blunder, but if they can turn around and pull out of the entire situation, they can salvage what's left of the administration. But if they continue down this path, they'll alienate more and more of their own voters and lose the very people who were sent out there, who sent them there in the first place. But I think the key aspect is that nobody voted for this war. And they voted in favor of this administration because this administration promised that they wouldn't get them involved in foreign wars. And this is certainly a war of choice. I do think there are things going on in the background geopolitically, of course, related to Russia and China. And we decided to make a stand here. But it's such difficult territory. The Iranians are gigantic. This is not Iraq. And, there's 95 million people in Iran. And, it's a very modern culture. It's not the kind of Saddam, setup. So it's very different. And I would say all this as well, which is you can definitely see on a foreign policy basis how we could say, we'd like Iran to be a totally different type of culture and all the rest of it. And I'm sure the people there would like a more progressive leadership. But to try to enforce that by bombs fails. That's failing. And so that's a failed policy. So therefore, the only thing you can do with a policy like that is turn around. And I believe, and I've predicted here, if they don't, now they lost this Joe Kent guy, they'll lose people like Tulsi and Bobby and others if they continue down this road. So all you can hope is that, the same group that brought you kind of domestic policies that made sense, like, a thriving economy, a strong border, America first policies, stopping the medical transhumanist agenda of transgender, overkill and all the rest of it. All those things made sense and we voted for them. So, there's a lot in the heart of this. But I don't count the administration out yet. They could turn around, but this was a tragic mistake and a very costly mistake. And there's just no way to defend it, and so don't even try. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 219. And I do believe that the policy of openness in relation to the UFO file from this administration could be very, very healthy to get past this war stuff, buckle it up, and get to UFO disclosure. You'd be looking at something. By the way, I don't think that Trump has control over the UFO file. So that needs to be noted when we're looking at all this. I'm going to do a whole show on who has that power. And what fantastic questions we've had tonight. I'm going to ask you for your last one or two questions there.
Okay, let's do two more.
Okay.
All right. So Helen Hoffman says, my question, DJ, do you believe it was Ebens at Roswell? And do you believe it's Planet Serpo / Project Crystal Night? Do you think that happened? Do you believe Skinny Bob is real / Ebens? I don't even know if I know what that question means.
Well, look, there have been legends. So let's go through a couple. Looking Glass was one legend that was brought out. The idea was they had something at Area 51 where you could look into the future. It was this technology. And you could base things, on that. Then we had the J-Rod piece back there, which was a captured gray scientist. We had captured him and we got all this information from him and all the rest. And, you know, if you got to be someone who worked at Area 51, you'd meet J-Rod and stuff. Now, I think a lot of these come from somewhere. The question is, did J-Rod look like that? Probably did. And the thing about Serpo was the idea of an exchange of, I think it was a Martian culture, and they exchanged with us, you know, but they took some of our civilians, we took some of their civilians, and there was this exchange that went on. Then there's the whole thing about alien hybrids. And by the way, when I interviewed David Jacobs about it, or when I talked to people way back, like John Mack and stuff like that, this did not, you know, they felt like this was very much not only possible, but already had happened. There was already some kind of a crossover that was going on. And they were totally aware, you know, if in certain circles, for example, people like Ingo Swann definitely say, oh yeah, you know, there are aliens here look exactly like human beings. And the way that you can tell them is that they're incredibly telepathic. That's the main difference, I guess. And that he had encountered them twice himself. Now, he was an amazing psychic, remote viewer, and all the rest. So he was giving us something there. I think there are things that are beyond our comprehension. There's no question. This whole show is dedicated to that very premise. I do think that if we understand and have the root of the mystery school esoteric understandings, which go into the work of Rudolf Steiner, the work around elementals, you know, the Edgar Cayce work, the Gurdjieff work, the Blavatsky's theosophy, you get a much better foundation of what you're talking about. And the mystery schools are there in the background, influencing the culture, not overpowering the culture, not saying you have to accept all this esoteric information. But if we understand the mystery school influence, then we can, a lot of these other things fall into place a lot better. And I've tracked the mystery school influence. We've presented it here on a factual basis. And many of the things that they do are fantastic, right? And supernatural in that sense. And they've kept certain types of techniques and things. You know, I'll just name one, which is shape-shifting. So, you know, very often in the literature, we'll hear about these things like shapeshifters, and it's an evil thing. But a lot of those mystery groups, in fact, the people who are connected with Gurdjieff talked about how he could shapeshift into another being. He could look totally different. I think it's a skill. And it doesn't, you know, to be superstitious about it would be, you know, oh, it's an evil thing or whatever. No, I think when you get up into these ranks, that there are possibilities that human beings, there are qualities that we have. I mean, look at Edgar Cayce, that he could go into a trance and diagnose somebody, you know, while he's lying there in Virginia Beach, somebody who's, you know, off in Kansas somewhere, and he's diagnosing their ailment and giving them treatment and prescriptions and all this kind of stuff. And then it turns out he did that for 40 years. He's incredibly successful doing it. So what level of quality, what are the abilities that we have? I can tell you that I know some incredible psychics. You know, there are remarkable people right in our midst. I can also tell you that, you know, in terms of working in the space of independent media, you know, and being aware of things like mystery school esoteric information, you have in the midst of this whole thing, G.G. Young's work, for example. You know, you have incredible people right now. And, you know, a lot of people are just distracted off the edge. And, you know, I keep using the Brigitte Macron thing, but I mean, it's stupid. You know, the podcast world is 98% stupid. Let's face it. We're going deep here. And, you know, if that's how it goes, that people go over a cliff with the junk conspiracy or whatever, the pop click world of that, then that's what they're up to. This is what we're up to. and we're going deep. We're taking it downtown. Everyone, what a fantastic show. Miss Olivia, your final question of the evening.
Well, I'm going to actually just throw this out to you, listening to you. Is that okay? So we are obviously extremely distracted. Our vibration is lowered by the fear that and chaos all
Yes.
around us.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I think I've come up with an answer, but what would you say? What would you like to see people do to empower themselves and to kind of correct their own environment around themselves individually and in their own small communities?
Well, I mean, you know, y- I think some of that is not being so addicted to social media, but also you can get very good things. So it's about really having a quality radar for the things that you ingest mentally. And, you know, Gurdjieff's come up a couple of times tonight. One of the great things that he talks about is the food of impressions. So the same way a healthy body needs the right types of food to be strong and healthy, your entire being requires the food of impressions. And so you need to feed the impressions into that deeper side of you. And it's like nutrition to the deeper side of you. So whether that's spiritual reading or inspirational art, whatever it happens to be, there are incredible, incredible things there at your fingertips. And of course, you know, the news of the day and all these things draw us away when you hear about war and, you know, these terrorists, you know, they need to be taken down and all this kind of stuff. Look, there is a time when, you know, you have no other choice and you have to go to war and things of this nature. And there's a lot of, you know, there can be a lot of pride and dignity in that. But there are also, you know, we understand how the deep state manipulates public sentiment, and we're at maximum manipulation at this point. So, particularly when it comes in periods of war, in times of stress, in times of economic distress, or, you know, they're moving in ways that we haven't seen in the past decade, I would say, in particular. So the fact that they moved with the COVID op, the fact that they moved, you know, this whole deep state COG thing up to the next level, the fact that the CIA is manipulating the public with the UFO threat, they are, you know, taking things to the boundary. But it is a very capable, focused person who'll have the best chance at a good response to a situation like that. So anything that helps with the food of impressions, I would say, is my best answer on that one. And it's not easy, right? But there's so many good things. And I can point out some books to you. This book, I don't know if you've had time or come across it. This is a book that came out year 2000. But it's all about these cases of missing time associated with people who had these extraordinary kind of apotheum experiences. This is a very interesting book, and I don't think really it got its due in that sense. But there are a number of different things, I think, where, you know, sometimes, I mean, there's so many creative things that somebody can do, learning a language, you know, studying a particular line of thought. And for me, really, I think it is books very often that center the mind. So that would be my best one on that. Yeah, I think we went to the moon, but I still think this is a great book to read, by the
And you
way.
think we're up on the moon right now?
I do. Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
No question about it. And Miss Olivia, with that, that is the final of the evening. What do you got? Super chats.
Okay, give me a second. I just wanted to add my 2 cents on that and say, just don't postpone joy anymore, because
Oh,
there will
wow.
always, if you obsess over what's happening in the world, um, it's going to zap. You're going to waste more days, more moments of your life,
Oh, boy. That.
being worried about things that you have really no control over, when you could be, you know, playing with your dog, you know, going for a hike, planting a garden, making a painting, whatever it is. These are moments of your life that are precious that you will never get back again. And so I try to remind myself that all the time. And it's a hard thing to remember, Yeah.
No question.
But each day is precious.
Absolutely. And, remember, the body is the temple, right? So when they get to this point where they're like, but you need to have this to be an enhanced human and take on this, Neuralink chip and all the rest of it. The line in the sand is that the body's the temple. That's what you can always start with that one.
Hell yeah.
And we can all agree on that. And with that, Miss Olivia,
Okay,
your super
all
chats
right.
are up.
There's a lot. Okay. Eurythmy is fun. Harry Zeri, Wolfgang McCarthy, Erica Swenson Elliott, Kevin Hunsey, I think, Debbie McAdoo, Mermaid Moxie, Chris Sevenbrook, Sarah Jane, John Carew, Tim Houston, Mike Brosnahan, Julie Sunshine, Eurythmy is fun, Drink Crow, Kimberly Dave, Kath M. Richards, W. Martin, Dharma of Kenzie Jane, Johnny Ricardo, and Eurythmy is fun. Thank you so much for your generous super chats tonight. Tonight we have a new precedent, which is to troll you. These are fans who are trolling you.
Oh, hilarious!
But also giving you donations at the same time.
Well, to all our supporters, thank you, because we couldn't do what we do without you, and it makes all the difference when you're behind us. We will be back with you next week. I'm going to do some shout outs before we go, however. And Kat Goyd is out there. She says, try to watch some funny movies, good comedy movies, and lighten up a little bit. That's always a good idea. And you want to do that. What a fantastic idea from incredible. Really great questions. Bravo, Miss Olivia. Nicely done. Let's see. Who have we got out here? Let's give us something to talk about. ET333. Dr. Judy Wood, great book. Indeed, Tim Houston. Great to see you out there. What time is it in Australia, Tim? Professor Hamamoto, meet the new same old boss. Pete Townsend, the new boss. The hieroglyphics picture. Yes. Did I not show that? Interesting. You know what I'm going to do is actually I posted it in a series of exhibits on the X account, Dark Journalist. So Dark Journalist, x.com/Dark Journalist, the whole account right there. And I actually put up 15 different exhibits for this show and for my Alex appearance. So those are all there. And certainly the actual hieroglyphs that Jesse drew are there as well. I dare not dig through the rest of these, although I'm tempted to see if it's among my souvenirs. Interesting. Yes. Let's see who else we got. Nathan Nolan doing backflips. I like it. I think that could be like a good term, actually. Yet again, Olivia, you're the best. Great advice. Hey, there you go. Absolutely. Let's see. Nature, yeah, somebody says. Yeah, nature's the great leveler of every situation. Michael, boom, boom, bang, bang. Enjoy your weekend off to the hunt monkey glitches. Wow, that's almost like, that sounds like beat poetry. It's like, hey, man, I want some bongos. Awesome. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Jessica Rodriguez, fantastic. Thank you for being out there in the ideas room. Great to have you with us. Great questions all night, everyone. And we brought up a number of topics tonight. We're going to dig in real deep on them in the weeks that follow because there's so much going on right now. It is off the charts. And Najat, the Dark Journalist, bringing the light of truth. Thank you. It's great to have you out there, Najat. I hope you're doing great. Hallelujah says, wait a minute. Uh-oh. Velez Videos. There we go. They were giving me a technical issue there. DJ, there's a local channel here called Stupid A Media. Yeah, that's awesome. Fantastic. Oh, wow. Let's see what else we got. Australia is in the future. I agree.
That's true, literally.
I agree. Good point. Excellent show. Thank you. Elsid Barrett. Ivan Langley, good night. And remember who you are. Fascinating. Absolutely. No question about it. But it was a great night. tonight, and the Alex show was great. It was a great lead up to this show. So
You've had a
between the
long
two,
day.
long day, but it's really, it pays off when people are listening. We got a lot of fantastic people on the ideas from tonight, and here's how it works. We had 4 million viewers for the Alex Jones show. And, it's this broad audience that we convey these ideas to. And then we come into the ideas room, and it's the potency and it's the focus of something that you can't even get in broad strokes. So it's an incredible balance of all worlds, and it's great people getting exposed to all of it. And trust me, I work, and in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking of ways to convey the information that's vital and that is potent in this period in time, and that people can use on some level to make the right types of determination about the environment that we're in. So I avoid the sensationalism, and I avoid taking the audience over the cliff with cliffhangers and crazy stuff like that. I just want you to know that the kind of covenant that we have with the people who watch the show is that I'm going to bring you this information the best way that I can, in a way that I think serves you. And I will convey the ideas and the things that I've discovered along the way. And I'll have great super friends out there doing it with me. Like I've mentioned, Gigi, of course. There's so many great guests on the show. Miss Olivia, fantastic, just great. Spies Like Us, there we go. I know Kate's out there. Great to see you. Atlantis is Go Return to Earth. I started the whole year off with all these incredible Atlantis shows, and we have more on the Atlantis tip. Of course, with the situation in Cuba, we might be seeing a real move in relation to the hot zone here. So keep our eyes very, very peeled on incidents occurring. And when Olivia interrupts Daniel, it frustrates me. It's not her show, it's his, says Brian M. Let me tell you something. Olivia has so much information that she could bring forward. She could do the entire show herself. So no.
Do I interrupt you?
No. I think you punctuate the conversation in a way that gets me thinking about more and more. So fantastic indeed. So let's see who else we've got. We've got Hamamoto. Thank you, sir. I need to catch up with your latest, Professor, because I have not seen your latest. Bo Krills, DJ, literally leading the fight against false disclosure. He is our battle standard, and I am amped. See, Bo Krills got it.
Nice.
See, Billy Idol gets it. I don't see why anybody else doesn't get it. Oh, wow. Fantastic. Well, everyone, it has been great to be here with you. The Ideas Room is rocking as usual. And to all the people who supported us in the Ideas Room tonight, thank you. I appreciate it. We will be back with you next week, and we have some great interviews coming up for you as well, off the charts, and some good surprises for you for this spring. You won't believe it. Just take my word for it. And of course, it says end broadcast, but
never really ends.
It never really ends. And never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot, and there can be again if we get past this kind of period and move into something along the lines that President Kennedy envisioned, where we cannot afford to fight wars which, even where the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. Quote from President Kennedy. And he was so correct then. What kind of a peace do we seek, and what kind of a peace do we want? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. I'm talking about genuine peace, the type of peace that makes life worth living. President Kennedy saved humanity during the Cuban Missile Crisis with his cool head and his great intellect and his great compassion. And we need more of that type of leadership. So I'm very happy to hail from the same state as President Kennedy and the great example that he left. We will be with you next week, and we'll see you all very, very soon. Until then, sleep tight and have a great evening, everyone.
God bless.